All right, let's begin. This is the Thursday, December 21st, 2017 meeting of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. A quorum is present, and we'll begin. Item 1 is to approve our agenda. Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions to the agenda? All those in favor of the agenda, well, can I have somebody move it into the record, please? Mr. Bernard, second by Mr. Hewitt. All those in favor of the agenda, raise your hand. Any opposed? Thank you. Second item is item 1B, a public comment period. If you want to address the board, please use the podium and the microphone, state your name, and we will allow you to speak for 3 minutes on any topic or item that's on tonight's agenda.
Good evening, Board. I'm Carolyn Growie, formerly of the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living. I am now here today as a public citizen. I would like to ask your graciousness to allow me to possibly maybe go over 3 minutes, and then I'll explain that first to you as to why. I have a few things that I want to share with you that are part of your agenda, and I also want to recognize some of your many staff, as this will be the last board meeting for probably some given time that you will see me at. So if I'm permitted to do so, I would like to be able to share with you some information.
I think we can make an allowance. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So first off, to stick to the rules and the agenda items, you are going to be saying a fond farewell to a dear friend and a dear supporter of the ride, and somebody who's been very important to the disability community to make sure that that voice is on your board. And I would certainly like to commend Jack for giving his time that he has given to the board. And we have been privileged to have you helping to serve and bring a voice forward that wasn't on the board previously. The board's movement to have somebody with disability be included on the board directly, in addition to the reports that are important from the LAC, has been a great asset to the community. And so thank you, Jack. I know you're going to hear a lot more from others in a little bit, so I will stop there on that part. Secondly, another agenda item that is on the report, which is very, very, very important, is that there's a piece on there about the millage update. So I don't know yet what the slogan is that you all are going to use, but there's still not enough of more places, more buses, more often. And so wherever you're going to go with this next slogan, and what may happen for the future of our millage and what's happened in our community. Certainly Ann Arbor is one of the most fortunate cities in the country to have such established service be available for our community members to be able to get any place, anywhere we want to go as often as we want to go within the region that you serve. I have been to a lot of places very recently, very fortunate to have had multiple interviews for things that were going on for me. And our city here in Ann Arbor, or our region here in Ann Arbor and the greater area with the ride, is very blessed and fortunate to have this service that's here. So I would strongly encourage anybody who sees this tape now, you can use that section to say that Carolyn supports the ride in future transit, because I do support the ride in future transit, and have been honored to be able to be part of the past work that's happened here, be part of the current work that's happened here, and applaud the future work that will happen here. I've been very fortunate to be in this community for 32 years riding our buses, and for much of those 32 years also being a person with disability and having availability of the paratransit program. I've also been a night ride user, so certainly, and I guess occasionally the holiday ride, not usually the holiday ride. But those would all be pieces that have been very, very important. Without the paratransit programs that exist now, and without the supports that exist in the ride, I could not be the success that I am, or that the community has been able to experience for so many other of your riders. I've been very fortunate to come to this town and be able to get my education, to be able to come to this town and get my first jobs. I've been working in this community, as I said, now for 32 years, to be able to raise my family, to be able to do recreation, to be able to go to healthcare, to be able to go to dentists or restaurants or fun things like plays, bars, football games, et cetera, that all the things that people want to be able to do who don't have disabilities. And I have not been limited in this region because of the services that we have. And so I'd like to applaud AATA, or the RIDE, for all of those services. Additionally, I'd like to recognize a few of the partnerships that I've been very fortunate to have in working with AATA. Still can't say that. We really got to work on that. You guys got to go to just the RIDE. That would be my recommendation. I have a really hard time getting that third A in there all the time at the beginning. But I want to just share that I have been involved in Ann Arbor since 1985. So going back to Chris White, who recently retired, that was probably my first engagement with the RIDE. And any question that came up, anything that was seen, anytime we wanted to see what could happen more, the person that was the go-to person, and I'm sorry that he's not here to hear it, was Chris White. And that was always a wonderful piece. And so even as you move forward and Chris is retired, I highly recommend still saying, hey, Chris, what do you think? Because he always has wonderful insight to a different part of the picture that sometimes we don't all look at, especially as advocates. Because when we're advocating, we just want the service. We don't look at all the ins and outs of every little piece of it. We are looking at what services are needed and wanted. My next engagement with the RIDE really went back to Mary Stasiak. So even though Mary role has always been in the marketing end of things, being able to work with Mary really directly with finding out how do we make sure people know things and that we share things and that information goes forward has been very beneficial to our community. And the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living was very fortunate that we have been able to be supported by the RIDE and your board members and your staff members, the bus drivers, et cetera, to be able to support the work going forward. And while we don't get to hear about the people behind the scenes a lot, the folks who are answering the phones at the front desk or who answer the phones at downtown, or Karen, who's even here tonight working but doesn't get to be on camera because she's on the other side of it at the moment, all need to be recognized because those individuals are the glue that holds you all together, and that is really, really important. An additional person that I want to recognize is Brian Klaus. And I know that Brian's just recently back from his medical leave, and I haven't had the opportunity to really engage in an in-depth conversation with Brian. But other than to say to you that Brian and I have worked on numerous passengers being able to get services, worked through numerous passengers who were going to no longer qualify for services for their abuse of the privilege of having them, regarding what is required to follow and use the paratransit program. And we've worked out having to help those individuals to figure out how to do their services better. And in doing so, that has made the program stronger. We've gone through numerous, I don't know what revision we are on the LAC packet, but it's, I don't know, do you guys have a version number on the newest one? But we've been over that for years. So I've been involved with the LAC at some level since 1987. So that's a really long time. And that's a very important piece. And that part of that A-RIDE and paratransit piece is the travel training. And while I personally haven't needed the services of late of Tracy, just the idea that that travel training exists and is available is outstanding. And if we can make sure that every rider who comes to town has that opportunity to learn what they need to learn so they can most effectively use our transit is really, really critical. Additionally, also with Brian, we've worked through what does that application process look like and how do we move that forward. And I can tell you from being around the country, not just this recent part, but over the many years, that one of the pieces that a lot of people talk back to is, what is your system doing where you are that's making it work effectively? And part of that is that timely answer of questions, that timely turnaround for passengers to be able to get what they need where they're going. And that was something that has traditionally been a follow-through piece that I have at least experienced as a professional in our community trying to assist others to get the services that they need. And so I just want to, again, highlight thanking Brian Klaus for that service. As I plan this exit from Michigan, I am not 100% thrilled about the transportation services where I'm going. They've already heard from me. So you may hear some more about that in the future. They certainly got an earful the first day. So I went in and they started to ask some questions about, I got my what is considered their paratransit card right away. That wasn't the problem. They did that very effectively. And then went to go down to ask questions for some other pieces, and they were going to start processing the long-term card. And they started asking questions that you do not ask on the application. And I wanted to say, and I did end up saying, after I looked at the board member of my new organization to say, do you want to see some of my transportation advocacy like today? And she says, oh, you mean you could do that right now? I said, yeah. And, what I could have almost done was pulled out a flyer from here, and I would have been like all done, and that would have been fine. But I didn't have that in my pocket to do so at the time. So I just want to say again that in Ann Arbor, we are so very fortunate to have all of you dedicating your time, all of your staff team members, and I really want to be able to continue to come home. Ann Arbor is my home. I wasn't born here, but I've been here, as I said, for the 32 years, and I'm looking forward to being able to return to having all of those services continuing to grow and expand and make our city, our region, better and better as it moves forward. And so it's been wonderful to get to know Matt a bit and to work with the previous executive directors that I've been able to work with. I was always very fortunate to be able to do that. I've been on stuff with Sarah in the past, and many of you on different committees at different times, and I appreciate all of those opportunities that both I and the community have been afforded. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else from the public who wants to address us? We'll move on then to item 1C, general announcements. And 1C1 is our farewell to Jack Bernard. So yeah, we will embarrass you a little bit, Jack. So why don't you join me at the podium if you don't mind? Yeah. There we go. That's personalized and everything.
Oh, look at that. I got my own bus. This one I can drive.
Yeah.
I'll stand back anyway.
Right. So, as everybody knows, this is Jack's last meeting, and Jack and I joined the board right about the same time, within a month of each other, I think. And he's been an integral part of everything that the board and the ride have done since he joined the organization in 2013, whether it be pushing us on issues of accessibility, his work to push us to pass a fair-minded and balanced budget, his work on the nominating committee. He's been a passionate and effective advocate for and liaison for the LAC. He was instrumental and invaluable in drafting our current policy manual, and lending his writing skills to that, his drafting skills, which were very valuable. I think one thing I always admired about Jack was he had a clear, articulate vision, while at the same time being willing to be open and be educated on other people's point of view to inform his own, which is a rare trait and very admirable. And I think I just want to ask my fellow board members, did anybody agree with Jack all the time? Because besides, no, I don't even think you did. But I think he would be disappointed if somebody did agree with him all the time, because Jack's program was to make us think about different angles and ways to view things. And sometimes, I swear to God, he would just say things, I'm like, he's just trying to make trouble now. He's just trying to argue now, even though we've all decided on this. But there was a method to the madness, which is, hey, let's not just kind of coast over these important items. Let's think about each and everything that we do and say here, because it's all important. And for that, we will miss his vision, his pragmatism, his leadership, his advocacy. And so, Jack Bernard, everybody. So we also have, in addition to that trinket, we have this one here in recognition of your insight, courage, and dedication as a member of the AAATA board. Thank you.
Look at that.
There you go. There you go.
Thanks.
Say a few words.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing. All right, I really will keep this short, because I really didn't think about the fact that you were going to have me say anything. This has really been a wonderful experience for me. It's not something that I was looking to do. I really eschewed local politics, and I wasn't really that interested in it. And in fact, if my friend Christopher Taylor, who I know from other arenas, hadn't sat me down one day at lunch and said, I heard you just got off a board at the Rudolf Steiner School. How'd you like to, consider joining the board of the, at the time, Ann Arbor Transportation Authority? And I said, that's really flattering, but I'm not interested in that. And we chatted for a while over lunch, and he kept coming back to it. And finally he said, well, look, after I turned him down time after time, he said, look, we really want somebody who is a regular rider and somebody who thinks about disability issues on the board. It's something that the city really wants to see on the board. And so he played to my sense of obligation. And I guess it did work. And I mean, it's been a really fascinating ride for me, and a wonderful ride. And I'll say, just last week I finished an objective of mine, which was to ride every single route of the bus. Consistently, I've been, I thought, I want to just see where does it go? Where does it go? How does it go? And then the routes changed, so I had to go back to some. But I finished my last route last week, and it's really wonderful, and it reminds me just how great the drivers are. I mean, the drivers really are spectacular. And I noticed this, that people getting off the bus, they say thank you a lot. And I don't think I've seen that anywhere else of a city of this size, where there really is this sense of being part of the city, the experience that people have here. And I think that's why our riders and our community support us so much. It's the people on the front line that are doing that work every day. So we really do appreciate the drivers and what they do for us. I also think we have just a top-notch administrative staff. I've been so impressed, as you've all heard me say so many times. We have to make decisions based on data and evidence and reasoning, and we can't just do it because it feels good. We need to be organized in our approach so that we can defend the decisions that we make and adjust them. And what a great staff that we have that really gives us solid information. And I know we've had, over the last few years at least, we've found cases where we didn't have all the information we wanted, or we discovered new information, but I always see that as a sign of progress. And the staff here are excellent and professional and really committed public servants. And I think it would be nice if the members of the public got to meet more of the staff more often, because I think seeing this kind of professionalism is so critical. You've all heard me say this. At least since I've been on the board, the best decision that I think we made was hiring Matt Carpenter. What a great leader you have been for the ride. You're poised and professional and persistent and willing to come forward with bad news. Sometimes there is bad news. Sometimes there is bad news, but we have to deal with it. I remember when my dad got a stress test, and he, my mother was really upset that he had gotten, had to go get this stress test. And he discovered there was some blockage in his arteries. And so they went and they tried to do an angioplasty, and it didn't, that wasn't going to work. So they had to go in and they had to do this surgery. And when they were inside, they found all this other blockage. And my mother was really upset, but I just thought, it's such good news. Like, he didn't have a heart attack, right? He prevented the problem. It was there. The problem was there. And we should deal with the problems. These are complicated systems, and I think we're just in great hands with someone who's willing to kind of face whatever the challenges are to the system and look for a long-term strategic solution for addressing those problems so that we actually have a ride that is serving the people of the community. And so I leave knowing that we're in really excellent hands. I do want to acknowledge the LAC. What a fantastic LAC we have. I doubt there is an LAC that is as effective and dedicated as the one that we have here. And for me, it's been really one of the highlights of my experience here to be able to be a part of those meetings and to really see members of the public who are dedicating their time to these salient issues. I want to encourage my fellow board members to go to an LAC meeting. Like, pick a meeting. I already told them to harass you. So, but when you get invited, or even if you haven't been invited, go to a meeting, meet the people. They're a lot like you. They're volunteers who are dedicating their time in the interest of this public service. They come out and come to the ride and engage around these issues and sit like you do and hear people express frustrations. It's really a productive group, and I just think there's everything positive to look forward to. I would encourage any opportunity to bring the LAC into a much more visible light for our community, because I think they're some of the best advocates we have for public transportation. I'll just conclude by saying, for me, it's just been a privilege to work with all of you. I admire you. I think about how much I just didn't know when I got here, and how important it is to have members of the community that are really willing to dedicate time to hard community problems, community challenges, community objectives. It's not glorious work. And you know what the pay is like. Feel free, by the way, to split up my salary. It is interesting to me the number of members of the public who actually think we get paid for this. And there are weeks, I'm sure, and months, like all of you, where you think back, wow, I spent tens and tens of hours reviewing materials, preparing. I know you're all like me, and I spend an enormous amount of time preparing for the meetings to be ready to be here, because we have a shared responsibility. And each of you has taught me a great deal, and I admire your public commitment, and I know that I leave the board in excellent hands with Eric as our chair to take us through our new decision-making model, and I'm really proud to have been among you. Thank you.
I'll open it up. Any comments or anything to add from any board members about Mr. Bernard? Mr. Krieg?
Yeah, Jack, congratulations. You graduated.
Thank you. Anyone else at this time? Yeah, we'll get you later then. We'll move on to item 2, which is our consent items. Approval of the minutes, the LAC Executive Committee appointments, which are in our packet. And there's also a item in our packet about the sale of buses. Any questions about any of this? Here come the treats. There you go. All right. All those in favor then of the consent items, raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. One abstention, which is Sue. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 3, which is policy monitoring and development. The annual plan of work items, which is 3A, 3A1, annual plan of work, which is in our packet, pages 13 and 14. This is more or less a final version of the annual plan of work that we were going to review. We've kind of had this, and we've bandied it about a little bit back and forth, but what we hope is the final draft is in our packet for our ongoing work items, kind of long range, some of the kind of board work strategic items that we want to tackle. Any questions about it or any additions, revisions, subtractions at this time? Mr. Alamein?
Since I see investment policy is on there for October, November, and December, and it says finalize, I wanted to disappoint you early that we were not going to finalize it tonight. We decided at our finance committee meeting this week that we had other priorities, and our actual monitoring report on the investment policy isn't due until March. And just to remind you, I think the only reason the investment policy is on this schedule, and I don't think it will be for next year, is that we don't have an investment policy right now. And I'm pretty confident that in January, we will be able to bring something to you.
Thank you. Anybody else? So we didn't put this as an adoption for a resolution because I think this will probably be an ongoing review, check-in, adjust, revision type annual work plan. I mean, right now this is what it is, but some of these items might come off, some of them, but this is probably something we'll check in and periodically review from time to time. So I don't think this is a resolution necessary, so no action on that. But if anybody has any further comments or wants to revisit it at another time, we can certainly do that. Then any questions or comments about it? Mr. Bernard?
Just the bit about the CEO evaluation, I was just wondering is that when the evaluation is going to take place? Is that the idea in June?
Right. I think the idea was June. We put it off for collective bargaining reasons this past year to do it, but I think, yeah, in June is probably where we have it slated on our policy monitoring schedule.
Is it useful to, the reason I'm asking is it useful to have some event as kind of a run-up so we just don't get caught by surprise? I think it's an easy thing to be surprised about, and I know that the previous board struggled with that, and I think it's just, and we've struggled a bit, and I just wonder whether there's one thing we might think about is, sort of stepping stones to make sure that we're being consistent.
Well, and that's why we have this slated for April. So we start the CEO evaluation procedure then, and then we can conduct it.
Oh, there it is.
In
I'm
June.
sorry, I totally missed that. Thank you.
No, that's a problem. Anybody else? Eli?
So in looking at this proposed calendar and planning, I see in January a board retreat, and the assumption, we've had some conversation about strategic thinking, planning, and items of that nature that might be opened as part of the retreat. I would have anticipated subsequent agenda items and meetings through the year where we would follow on the day's work. And so there's a chain or theme of logic of what it is that is on our agenda and how much we as a body are going to need in order to fully explore and create policy, use a policy governance board in those areas. So I'm not sure that I'm looking for a fix right now, but I think as we move forward with this as a living, breathing, working document, that there are issues that we've talked about as a body with regard to strategic thinking and the like, and that I'm it's not that I'm not seeing it, I think it's in here, but I think it would be better if we could call it out so that both we and the community, if they're so interested in engaging with us, would be aware that on a horizon agenda, we would be addressing those types of issues, maybe helping to fill up some of the audience. Thank you.
Sure. No, good point. And, the board retreat, of which also you see in January ends development, which a big part of our board retreat will be that ends development discussion, which is the natural place for the strategic kind of long-term thinking, planning, conceptualizing will go. We don't certainly end it in January. You'll also notice we do more ends development in February, hopefully to finalize in March. That's also timed with the budget process. So, I think we've talked about this before, but if we can develop the ends, start talking about it, I mean, it's obviously a year-around conversation, but if we can formalize it at the board retreat, start putting structure and language together and finalize it by March, we can hand it off to the staff and say, here are our ends to the extent they're revised, and here's our new strategic leadership, planning, thinking through our ends vision. We can hand it off to the staff at that point, and then they start to look at that and start to put dollar signs to those visions, those ends, and what we want them to accomplish, and come up with a budget to meet what they think we want them to do. They start that in March with hopefully getting back to us sometime in May with at least a first run at a proposed budget. And if we look at that budget and say, this isn't, we want more dollars over here because we think this is a more important end than this, then we spend a couple of months doing that, hopefully by the end of the summer to get to a budget that we can enact and start that with the fiscal year. Then the process starts all over again with checking and adjusting as we go through. But certainly the strategic visioning of it, we hope, will take place year-round and not just start in 1 month and end 2 months later. But it's a continuing, ongoing discussion. All of the discussions we've had about strategic planning and thinking and leadership to this point, we will hopefully coalesce and have a structured approach to at that board retreat. That's when we do it. But certainly it's not to start it, stop it, and make it at one particular date. So to your point, I think it's an ongoing discussion. I think we've built it in here. It's probably not called out to the extent that you would see it, but I would hope we would build it into the agenda going forward and not miss that. So, I mean, but thank you for raising that because that's going to be an important thing that we stay on top of. I mean, that's the whole reason we're going to this policy stuff.
Just a quick follow-up, and again, this is about clarity and communication, and the description of ends that emerge in the retreat are discussed in February and March, and it's ongoing. I'm not sure that I, for one, interpreted that ends development would be that follow-on, and I suspect that if, as a member of the board, I'm not able to read through the policy governance language here, I don't know what a citizen who would pick up an agenda and see that they're talking about ends development would be enthused to follow what we're talking about. And maybe it's ends development with subheading so that the specific topic area in plain English so that the community understands or has the ability to understand what's on our agenda, again, would help. I think I understand the use of the policy governance language, but what I'm concerned about is that it's language that's not shared by the 100,000 plus in the community, and we really need to speak to our owners in language that they can comprehend and take action based on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the annual plan of work? Any comments? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to item 3B, policy monitoring and committee reports. We'll start with B1 from the governance committee. We've had kind of an ongoing discussion the last couple of months about policy 339, which is serving on outside boards. I think we also had, at the request of Mr. Cooper, some We wanted some consideration about this board's feeling and endorsement about the train station project that the city is partnering with, I guess, is partnering the right word, with the federal government to that project, which is in our city, and it's the plan which is being developed and discussed in our community, and what role we have to play in that, what level of involvement we should have, if any, with that plan. It's been discussed at the Transportation Commission. Mr. Guru Raja has weighed in on that. We wanted to bring it for discussion for a full board here, and this kind of tied nicely with Policy 339, which is why this is on here. We thought maybe we would have some kind of statement ready, but I think we probably need to have a little more discussion about it this evening to see kind of where the board feels. So I don't know if we want to open it up at this time to either Mr. Cooper or other board members to talk about either the project, the process, what the board's role should be, just as on a fundamental or conceptual level. But we'll open it up for discussion at this time about this board, the agency's role with the train station project. Anybody who wants to go first? Mr. Krieg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been very involved in advocacy for one of the two sites. I don't believe that the AAATA should be an advocate for one site or the other, despite my very strong opinion based on what I believe are relevant facts. What I think our role should be is to analyze how we would interact or interface with either of the station locations. And if one of them turned out to be significantly easier for providing bus service, then that should be made known. But I think it should be totally based on professional study of the accessibility of either site to buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Eli?
I'm going to take what might be perceived by some to be a different tact on the issue, because the interest of this authority is not necessarily, or what I as a board member might be asking for, is voice of support behind this or that alternative location. I would like to think in the context of policy governance and in context of our ends, that our N 1.0 speaks to providing services to destination via service options. And so intercity passenger rail service exists in our community, and through the view of many, the existing facility has a number of challenges, not just because I'm saying so as the city's transportation planner, but from the perspective of those Amtrak riders who can't find a seat in the waiting room for a whole variety of reasons that I need not elaborate on. But it's important to note that when we think about a train station in a community of Ann Arbor, it's the only passenger rail facility in Washtenaw County. Now, I know there's desire in Ypsilanti, and in the future, I would anticipate and I would hope that we as a transportation authority and as a community could have more than one. But today, we have one that has a number of challenges, and so that the recognition of the limitations on the existing facility, although it's not an AAATA service or facility, we do have a bus route that connects nearby the existing facility. But in communities that embrace a multimodal transportation environment. It's not a side door transit, but it's an integrated multimodal transportation operation. So it matters not whether it's here or there. It matters what we as a transportation authority in this community want to encourage both our city as well as ourselves as a part of a process and a project. That the future of the Ann Arbor Station from 2006 included a significant transit intermodal component. The acknowledgement was not only were we to have Amtrak service, but that this was going to likely be a very busy commuter rail stop as well. And that the issues that we have as the only point of access to rail transportation in the county means that, much to the dismay of many, that we're going to have to accommodate parking. We as a city have asked for service to be extended west of town so that commuters could be attracted and not have to come to our core area. But those decisions are made by system operators beyond our ability to address, and yet we still need to make sure that our community, our citizens, travelers to and from our community have a means of access and egress to higher level forms of transportation. 80, 85,000, 90,000, pick a number, daily commuters that descend into Ann Arbor, and right now they don't have a choice other than the AAATA bus service or private automobiles. This is part of the long-range strategy and solution for us to have multimodal access to an economic engine that drives this city and the region in which it exists. So some of the language that was being circulated referring to supporting an EA process, the EA is a federal requirement that's a baby step along the way that we have to go through in order to deliver a type of facility and the types of services that meet our, what I believe are our ends and our aspirations. So I don't want to get into, nor do I think it's appropriate for this board to quarrel over site 2A, 2B, or 3A, but to rise to policy governance and say, in a community of 125 going to 150,000 residents and employees, we need to have viable, we need to have types of multimodal service access and egress that is commensurate with what our expectations are in our quality and form of life. And so with that, I'll stop, but I would hope that we can come up with a robust expression of the importance of these types of transit-related services and transit interface opportunities so that there's no mistake about the AAATA and our positioning on providing high-quality transit facilities and services within our jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on this particular topic? Prashant? Anybody? Prashant?
I appreciate the comments so far. I can't help but think that my statements in past meetings is maybe the reason we are having this discussion, but that's fine. I understand the points that have been made so far. This process has been going on for quite some time, and that's fine. Some of these things take a while. I think maybe because it's taken a while and because it's, you know, the price tag and the importance to the community are pretty large now, and large infrastructure projects can oftentimes do that. We should really understand what precedent endorsing either a process or something like this would mean for us. So I've gone on the record both at the commission and the board about my concerns, but there are components of the process that may be a reflection of federal guidelines or standards that I worry are not necessarily in line with the values of our own community. So for example, a heavy reliance on traffic delay metrics, a heavy reliance on parking capacity. When we're trying to alleviate concerns in other ways, I'm looking at a lot of the process and I'm seeing a lot of emphasis on those things. And if we were to endorse a process that heavily endorses or is using these types of tools, is that a good precedent that we want to set? Are we saying that these values are in line with our community and it's worth going through these processes and these approaches to get federal money, and regardless of what maybe our values are as a community in terms of moving people, accommodating pedestrian and friendly environment that our transit users need. So there are a lot of issues here, and I do want the fact that there is possibly precedent-setting implications to our decision here, and it's a large investment. I think it requires a lot more deliberate and careful thought about how we address it.
Thank you. Anybody? Jillian?
Thanks. I missed last month's meeting, so I apologize if I missed anything really good here. It sounds like I did. I did want to just note that it's always good. Our policies, and I think that the discussions that we've had on the board have been very clear, that we will not ignore opportunities to promote multimodal solutions. And I think that that is what's really in play here. I agree with some of the comments that have already been made, that it is less about the site and more about making sure that the train station is as effective as possible, making sure that the train service has the most riders as possible. I see our number one end, even though it isn't quite phrased that way, is to reduce automobile dependence. And so the more people that we have using the train station, the more convenient it is, the better. And I would like, and I think that we have seen this agency in the past, and when you discuss precedent, we have endorsed, we have endorsed projects, and we have written letters of support in projects, and often we bring up technical questions about, what it would mean for bus service to serve different places. But we have certainly endorsed projects and written letters of support through federal processes to show that we support, multimodal projects and partner projects moving forward. We've also chosen not to endorse things like highway lane widening. We've been asked to support those projects and have declined to write a letter of support, or even have offered, technical reasons why we were concerned about certain projects. So I think that there is precedent, and if it would be helpful to advance this project for us to put in a letter or to note what the technical aspects of what it would mean to provide service to that site, and say, yes, we're prepared to provide service to this site. If that would be beneficial to the process, then it's something I think we should certainly consider doing. I appreciate Mr. Cooper's point about the fact that this is the only train station in the county. And more to the point, we're not talking about a community of 125,000 people that we serve. We serve a community of 200,000 people. There are 80,000 people who live on the east side of the county who, frankly, it would be a practical alternative to get to Detroit by coming into Ann Arbor, parking here, and going to Chicago. That's something that people do. And so, I do want to consider those folks as well. And I think that we need to think about what that trip looks like for them, regardless of the site. What does it look like for a trip, especially if we don't want them parking here? What does it look like for a trip from Ypsilanti to come into the city and use that bus to then get on a train to Chicago? If it's a 45-minute trip and you have to transfer, and then you get on your bus and with all your luggage and your children, and then you get in the train, and then you ride on the train for 5 hours. That is not a very practical option, and it's not something that's going to encourage people to use public transit. And so, I just am hoping that we can consider what the options look like. And I know that in our policies, it certainly says that that our CEO would not leave us unprepared. And so I assume that that folks are looking at what with the alternatives that are available, would look at what impact that would have on our agency. And at the point when this becomes relevant, that we will be ready to know what this means for us, what routes are going to need to change, how the service will be impacted. And so I'm not actually sure in the process whether it would be beneficial for us to write a letter of support at this time, but if that would advance the process and advance the federal funding for this project, then I would support doing that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from board members on this topic? Statements, opinions? Kyra?
I just have a general question either for Eli or Matt or Prashant, and excuse my maybe lack of knowledge on the subject, but is there a reason or is there an ownership linkage why we as the board would be asked to make a statement about this at this stage?
It's a good question. I think the fact that no one has an answer for you makes it a really good question. Eli.
So the city has been working on a contract with MDOT to the FRA in advancing an environmental analysis for the purpose of constructing or not constructing, because the no-build alternative is in the planning process, for a period of time that resulted in the product of an EA that was released for public comment. The public comment process has been completed at the end of November, and as I described, the EA in this process is one small step. There is the possibility that there will be an item before City Council after the FRA completes its review of our work, and that the authority has been a partner to this project dating back to 2006 in the context of looking at a means of providing enhanced access to our community. And as an issue that will likely be before council, that the RIDE has been a partner, and I can tell you, if you have read the EA, there is a substantial transit intermodal component of the project that at one site would, based on previous cost estimation, yield about an $8 to $10 million value of investment, that I think it behooves this board to go on record and let the City Council know that we are still supportive of providing a viable, efficient, effective intermodal transportation that we would be a part of. And so in the absence of that statement, there is a vote of our representative on the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission that framed this matter for us to deliberate over. So I think the current position of this board needs to be memorialized by the body, not by an individual who is at an outside environment. And I think that we need to, or I would like to know, and I suspect that leaders at MDOT, leaders at City Hall, elected officials, the community would like to know if our ends suggest that this is important, that we as a board that are duly appointed to serve this organization are in a position to express our posture on a significant opportunity that is presenting itself. So I think it is ripe for deliberation. Whether it's ripe for action is a decision of the body.
Follow up? Go ahead.
Thank you. Just, do you have an idea of the timeline of when it would be before City Council?
The document has been under review by FRA since mid to late November, before the Thanksgiving holiday. I have stopped providing estimates of when FRA might complete its work, just based on the years of waiting that I've gone through.
Anybody else? Mr. Hewitt?
Um, Pardon me. I certainly think it's appropriate for the board to weigh in on a new multimodal facility. I certainly don't think we should be getting into trying to evaluate the environmental impact statement process. We're not that level of expertise, but I think it's certainly appropriate for us to say that we are in favor of a new multimodal facility that will serve both buses and trains in our community. And I think we have come to the end of a process, I think, of at least one major step. It's certainly something that is going to be in the going before city council, will be in the public realm, and I think it's important that we weigh in that it is, that we are in favor of the process and in favor of the process continuing. I don't think we should get into where it goes, although, like Larry, I have strong opinions on that. But I don't think that's it's not our job to decide whether to second guess the FRA or to try to decide whether the environmental impact process that was done, I assume by contracted consultants, was appropriate. If it meets federal standards, then it would appear to be appropriate. So I would be in favor of a resolution that supported the process continuing.
Thank you. Others? Don't get shy now, Jack, if you want to, you know.
So, I mean, far be it from me not to repeat myself. So we'll continue on. I guess I'll make 2 points, and one is I think one of the more salient things we should be doing as a transportation provider is thinking about what the opportunities are out there and how we will pragmatically serve those sites in our interest. And I think it's important for the staff to be thinking pragmatically about how it affects the kind of service that we can provide and how we will hold up our end of the bargain with the community that we are going to provide public transportation to the various important destinations in our community. And so I'm confident that the staff are looking into how to do this, and I think it's critical that we remain vigilant so that ultimately whatever plan is adopted, and I don't know how much we'll have our finger on the tiller, but I think we want to be prepared for the variety of outcomes. The second thing I'll say, and I know that this is the thing I'm repeating, we had some discussion a couple of meetings ago, and and lots of people in the room have strong opinions about where the site should be. None of our individual opinions matter here. I don't think they matter here. No person here can speak for the board. The board speaks for itself with a vote. Even when someone is filling a role as being a liaison to another committee and voices a public opinion, that opinion is not our opinion. Our opinion only comes with a vote. We're entitled, each of us, to our own views, but in terms of what the ride's view is, that is only something we address with a vote. And I think it's really important for the public to realize that there may be people here who have their own views and who've expressed them in public places, even in places where someone might assume that they're speaking for the board. And I don't think that's a fault of the speakers, but I do think people may make that assumption. But this board speaks even if we are divided with one voted voice.
Thank you. Anybody else? So, I mean, I think in terms of next steps on this issue, I mean, it seems to me we're talking about two different tracks here. One is the expression, and they both have to do with expression, but one is expression as concept and one is expression as pragmatism. So the pragmatism decision tree looks like how does this project relate to our services, our resources, how would we support it? As I think it was Larry who pointed out, would we spend more money doing it here or there? Not so much endorsing one location or the other, but where would we most have our best effective service? and how does, and maybe within that is the framework of, how does it best align with our values of our own policies. Then the expression as concept is, kind of broader things such as there's process, there's location, there's environmental impact. Other things, there's multimodalism as a concept and high quality transportation in our community, driving an economic development engine, as Eli pointed out, and some higher level of generality things that we could endorse. So I think the deliberation for this board is, do we want the pragmatic approach? Do we want the conceptual approach? What do we want the staff to do if it's the pragmatic approach? Because to Jack's point about speaking with one voice, it's not enough for any particular board member to say, well, I hope we follow up on this or that. We have to give them clear direction as one body to say, this is what we want you to do. And if it is just a letter or a resolution or something we publish publicly one way or another to endorse something or another, that's one. If it's that's one possible output that we could reach. The other is we ask the staff and we give a public expression through having the staff come back to us and say, this is how we can best support the project with our resources. This is the most effective way we can do it, and submit that. So I guess I'd like to, if people want to, I'm trying to narrow our focus down to a decision. Perhaps people want to, and I guess I'd like to hear some debate about that in terms of which direction we'd like to go. And then I'd also like to hear Matt weigh in about what they think they might be able to pull off in terms of a resource capability point of view. But I guess I'd like to hear some, and if you don't have your minds made up, this, we don't have to, as I think Eli pointed out, it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow. So, I mean, we probably have some time. So if more deliberation is necessary, but I guess I'd like to hear if, since it's fresh on our minds and people are furrowing their brows and really putting their considerable collective brain power to it, to kind of weigh in at this point and say, which path do you prefer? Or if there's a third path that I didn't identify, let's get it out there. But I guess I'd like to hear which way people are leaning, because I've heard most people weigh in, kind of talk on both levels. So I guess I'd like to narrow it. Larry, go ahead.
I actually think it's important for us to weigh in on both levels. The conceptual level that has to do specifically with our highest level ends, which is to provide good transportation that is accessible and safe and so on and so forth, and that this is a method of doing that. That is, having a better station can help us as a community to achieve those ends that we've articulated, and that the carrying through of the process should be encouraged in every way that we will be capable of providing. That, within our means, we will support it. And then the pragmatic thing is that once we've said we've supported it, we've got to figure out how much it costs for each of the options. And if it turns out that there's a significant difference between one option or the other, then we should be upfront with the community and say, this is what we see as the long-term operating cost of locating in one place versus the other. Now, I'm not sure that I want to lay something really heavy and detailed on the staff at this point as a board. I would, or put it this way, I would like to hear from our CEO about what he thinks the appropriate level of detail would be, and whether that's practical within the means of the staff that's available.
Although I would add to what you said was, I think eventually we will need that granularity from the staff, right? I mean, we will need the really hard dollars and not kind of just, we think it's this or that, but eventually we, as somebody's got to watch over the budget and as a body that's going to, as a millage coming up next year, that this is not a part of, quite frankly, we have to be responsible in that fact. So I think we've got to, if this is going to be a real big ticket budget item, I mean, we've got to know that going up front. So those points well made. Anybody else with any thoughts on this particular issue? Jillian?
I don't know that that's a fair question for staff. My understanding of this process is that a preferred alternative has been suggested by the city, and they're waiting on the FRA to endorse it. And so asking staff to come up with a scenario for a station that is not actually under consideration might not be the best use of resources. And, I think that knowing what, how routes would work, what routing would look like, what the service would be, but to actually come up with a cost analysis depends on a lot of assumptions about the frequency, and, there's a lot that goes into it, and there are a lot of cost options that can be made. There's a possibility that if it costs more to serve a particular location, then you just run fewer buses there. So the trade-off isn't so much that this place would cost more than that place. It would be that this, that if this is the amount that we can budget to, to serve the train station, that this place could have better service or this wouldn't, or that we would have to pull service somewhere else. So I'm concerned about the complexity of that decision, and whether it might be wise on the technical standpoint to wait for FRA to release their endorsement so that we have a more concrete plan to work with. On the policy side, I would actually endorse that, and would like to see a motion, and perhaps the easiest way to do this would be to have the board resolve to ask staff to bring us a motion to that would or to bring us a set of public comment that they would submit, or not public comment, but to suggest comments that this agency could make based on the values that we've set forth. Suggest what comments could be offered by this agency to promote and support the plan. And I think that as a board, we could pass a very simple resolution that says we are supportive of having an excellent train station in Ann Arbor. We could pass something that is that simple from a policy standpoint, and I would be supportive of doing that. I do think that this more detailed analysis is necessary. I just don't know that right now is the right time.
Roger?
I guess I would echo Jillian's comments that I would certainly support a statement that conceptual statement that we approve of the process. We would like a new multimodal facility, but I think the level of detail of analysis is going to be a drain on resources, and it might well end up as being both premature and maybe irrelevant by the time we get to the end of the process. So I would not like to use staff resources at this time to try to evaluate locations or come up with cost estimates, because I say there are just too many variables at this time to know what exactly we'd end up doing. We don't know how frequently trains are going to come in, for instance, regardless of where it's located. So I very much in favor of a general resolution supporting the process, but I think we ought to save staff time right now and wait till it's the process is farther along.
So maybe this is a good time to put Matt on the spot, and Brian too. I know he's trying to be quiet over there, but yeah, but no, I mean, but for given the comments we heard, I mean, my own personal feeling is if we are fairly certain about what the recommended plan will be, then I don't think it's premature for the staff to say, well, if this is the frequency of the trains and we know some of that granularity, then I don't know that it's inappropriate to ask the staff to weigh in and say, here's what it costs based on what we know the recommended plan to be versus, evaluating both locations or several options or making too many assumptions that will be no good. But if we know the level of granularity, then it might be worth that expression. We could add, we support a high-quality train station and multimodal transportation. And we could also add to it that we can fully support it, and we could add that to our kind of general statement with high-quality bus service, the same as we support the rest of our service area. But I wouldn't go that far unless, the staff is prepared to weigh in and say, here's what we can add to the mix, and this is what it would cost us, et cetera. So I guess I'm looking, Matt, to see, has the staff looked at this already? What would it be prepared to do, given the information that's within the plan already? And what would you need to know before you could make that assessment? So maybe you don't have those answers tonight, and if there's other questions you think you probably need to, other direction you need from the board or other information you need from the plan or somewhere else, just kick that around, but maybe you want to weigh in at this point.
Well, first I'll just start by letting the board know we certainly really appreciate the work you're taking right now to come to a single direction for us. That really helps us to focus. We have been doing some work. I'll describe it as sort of qualitative work on the environmental assessment, the draft. I would say that a detailed review of that is beyond our ability and expertise, echoing Roger's point. This is a very large project that the city has been shepherding for many years and involves many factors that we're simply not the best people to question. Furthermore, I'll say we've looked at the implications for our services. I think that was a question that was raised earlier, and we can certainly provide more detail. My only concern is that I don't know if it'll help you make a decision. From a preliminary basis, Jillian makes a good point about assumptions into the future, and there are a lot of assumptions that go behind the various scenarios. Right now, in terms of implications to us, the two scenarios are very, very close. We can refine that and give you more precision in terms of the implications to the AAATA services. But the two options, they have pros and cons, but in terms of implications to this authority and our immediate business, not speaking about our broader interests in the community, they're very close. So I'm not sure the deciding factor really rests there. I think it rests with many of the other issues in the community about pros and cons of the location that are being handled in the environmental assessment report and that we're not well suited to try to address. So we can certainly give you more precision about implications to our services. I'm just not sure it'll help you a whole lot with that decision. But I will say that Mr. Cooper is right, and we certainly have been a stakeholder to a process that's been going on for some time. And I would concur that the end statements that the board has laid out for us do support the idea and principle of having a superior train station and providing good access to it. So I can reinforce that. And if the board is interested in seeing some more precision about implications to our services, we can certainly refine that to a more granular level, knowing that it's built on assumptions on top of assumptions about something that won't happen for several years. So it is a bit of a guess in that regard. But one thing I think I can say is that a review of the entire EA process is not something I believe that the agency is capable of doing, nor should it.
Jack?
Thanks, Matt, for that. That was very helpful to me. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and you can feel free to say, yeah, we're not ready to give that yet. When you said they're very close, what it made me think was, and when you're saying they're very close, I understand you're talking about the narrower sense of us providing bus service, not some of our larger objectives. So thinking it in that vein, to the degree, and I know there are lots of variables out there that we are not going to be able to affect, but would you say that, just to potentially add some comfort to the viewers, would you say that we should be able to provide acceptable, I'm not saying ideal, but at this point, as we potentially forecast, we should be able to provide acceptable service to the train station, wherever it happens to be?
Absolutely, in terms of just reassuring anyone in the community who might be interested, irregardless of where the community's final decision might land regarding location, the agency absolutely will endeavor to provide the best bus service possible. Both locations are already on large bus routes that already have a considerable amount of service. That's one of the one of the things about the implications to our cost, that actually there's not a big differential in terms of adding a whole lot of service because both corridors are already well served. I also, just to reinforce, I think there are so many other factors that need to be taken into consideration aside from just our narrow cost and passenger trade-off, that we're not well suited to trying to address. For example, implications to the university's bus service. Also a very large consideration, and we're not well suited to try to opine on that. But absolutely, I can reassure the public that wherever the community decides to put the station, we'll be providing the best service possible.
Thank you.
Others? Mike?
I don't want to be too redundant compared with other statements that have been made tonight, but there seems to be some a little bit lack of agreement on every point, so let me state what my feelings are. I certainly think it is appropriate that the RIDE makes a statement in terms of, as other people have said, in support of multimodal transportation, and the fact that the current train station has some significant deficiencies in that regard, which therefore points to the need of a new train station. On the other hand, I have a lot of reservations about going farther than that, and many of those reservations has to do with the fact I think that I don't want to burden the staff on something that may not be a good use of their time. And therefore, I don't know that we need to have any more input from staff on this.
Thank you. Others? Larry?
Yeah, for my part, what Mr. Carpenter said about the basically even cost of serving either place, that was what I was looking for, because I think the only reason that we would weigh in on either one or the other of the locations would be if there would be a significant long-term cost. And just that we should be upfront. I don't think we need much granularity at this point, so I think we can leave that aspect out. That's my opinion, in concurrence with Jillian, Roger, and I think Mike. So I'm not sure that, at least from my point, that there's much disagreement. Oh yeah, I also wanted to clarify a couple of things about the station. This is the busiest station in Michigan, in case you didn't know that. And the aspiration, we have two organizations that are hoping to provide train service in the 2030 to 2040 time range. The Michigan Department of Transportation is aiming at 10 trains a day each way between Detroit and Chicago. And the RTA is aiming at 8 trains a day each way between Ann Arbor and Detroit. We'll see.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. So taking all those comments, we'll review those and see what I've taken a lot of notes, and I'll have to probably go back and watch the tape, but we'll probably try to come up and coalesce these into some kind of workable expression, public expression, and see what we can do. I'm sure we'll nail it right on the first try, as we always do. But we'll work through it. We'll see what it looks like when it's all done. So thank you for those, and we'll try to refocus that and sharpen that into something that's appropriate and that we can all agree upon. So thank you. Anything else on this? Moving on then to item 3B2, report out on our Finance Committee from Mr. Alamein.
Our last Finance Committee meeting, we spent the majority of our time talking about the millage, various aspects of it, and actually the majority of that discussion involved a presentation that was given by Hugh Clark, the retained pollster that we had, who I think provided some very good information. And of course, the millage is on our agenda later this evening. The second item that we spent time on is another item that's on our agenda later this evening, and it's the monitoring of the ends policy. And by the time we finished those two items, we had already run over time. And as I mentioned earlier, the third item, which was the investment policy, we decided to defer. Just for clarity, particularly for anybody who from the community who's looking in or is here tonight, we do not have 2.6 in our policy manual, which is called investment policy. We have not had anything in that policy since we adopted the policy governance. And I just want to make clear, there's nothing to worry about. We do have a policy that's in there from the very beginning, 2.5.6, which is called financial conditions and activities, that really very much limits what the ride can do in terms of their investment. And we've felt all along that that protects the interests of the ride, it protects the interests of the public in terms of any kind of risky behavior in terms of on the investment side. So in fact, we even discussed whether we needed a 2.6 in specific investment policy or whether that would be adequate, what was already in there. We've decided it probably is better to expand that somewhat. But anyway, I just wanted to make it clear that we feel we're pretty well covered already, that even though we do not have an investment policy, which I'm confident that we will have one, I hope by next month, certainly by February.
Thank you. Any questions, comments on Finance Committee meeting report? Okay, we'll move on then to item 3B3, which is a report out from the Service Committee. Mr. Hewitt.
Thank you. We also had essentially the two primary same agenda items as the Finance Committee. The first, Larry reported on a train trip between Ypsilanti and Detroit, in which there were a number of public officials on, demonstrating the feasibility of that service. We then got the presentation from Hugh Clark, and we had a number of follow-up questions for him, which took a good chunk of our meeting. We discussed, primarily when and the millage should take place. We got a lot of good data to help us with that, and we also discussed whether we should go for an increase. Mr. Clark's was pretty emphatic that if we did not have specific ways to spend that money that we could tell the public, that would not be a very good idea. But we did get some information that it is possible to go back before the 5-year expiration of the new millage, to go back and go for an increase at some time before the end of that 5-year period, should we come up with a use for that, for additional money. And then Matt presented a draft of the ENDS monitoring report, recognizing that we are just less than half a year into policy governance, and we still have a lot of work to do, but I think we're all very impressed with what we saw so far in the ENDS monitoring. So, and that was pretty much the entire meeting.
Okay. Any questions, follow-up on Service Committee? Okay. We'll move on then to item 3B4, which is policy monitoring ends, which was referred to in both the committee meetings. I think Mr. Carpenter wants to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking to page 17 in the packet, item 3B, ENDS monitoring report. We are trying to maintain our schedule for policy monitoring, and as we've mentioned in the committees, or rather to contextualize my presentation here, I am repeating information that I've shared with the committees. In the committees, it seemed to be a very large consensus that it was in the public interest to share this information at this time and in this context, even though one of the first things I said to both committees was, it's not done yet. And I really appreciated the patience and graciousness that both committees received the information. So please forgive me if I repeat things that I've said already to the committees, but they felt there was value in speaking to the public. As part of our annual cycle, the board evaluates, monitors policies to deem whether or not the outcomes produced by the agency are sufficient every year or adequate, whether or not we are in compliance with the policies. On our schedule, that is to happen around this time, November, December of each year. So the board can look backwards in a rear view mirror monitoring mode to say how well did it go over the last year with what we asked staff to accomplish the beginning of the previous year. This sets the board up in January to have a retreat and a discussion about where you want to go next, and if that may include changes to the end statements. So there's a larger context and sequence, some of which our chairman alluded to earlier. About 6 months ago, the board adopted policy governance, and we have been feverishly working on producing policy monitoring reports as we go, knowing that we've had great conversations among the board already about the quality and how close we're getting with them, and I think it's definitely improving. The ENDS policies and the monitoring process that we're presenting here, we are not asking the board to accept this monitoring report at this time, simply because it's not finished. The work that's presented in the packet is a great example of work to date at trying to create CEO interpretations, rationale, and identifying possible pieces of evidence that the board could use to gauge compliance. But despite a lot of great work, primarily by Sarah Grinjevich, who's on leave right now, celebrating a growing family, we've only been able to progress to this level. Nevertheless, you can look in the report and see some, I think, very good examples of the thought process that is going on behind the scenes to try to operationalize the board's direction to the organization. Some of the interesting things we've learned thus far is the importance of the board's policy is obvious and very clear. A dawning realization that the CEO's interpretation is maybe as important or almost as important and not easy to do with ends. Frankly, it seems to be easier to make those interpretations with the means statements, which tend to be very business-oriented statements and therefore a bit easier to demonstrate compliance with. The ends are a bit more conceptual. And so we're attempting to use the CEO interpretations, as we understand policy governance, to operationalize your policies, to turn them into something that can actually be defined by a reasonable layperson, transparently seen, oh, that's what the policy means. Provide a rationale for why we think that interpretation is correct, and then present evidence of whether or not we are in compliance with the policies. Some of the policies, there's one on increasing ridership, we feel very good about. We think that's a fairly straightforward one, easy to demonstrate compliance and evidence either one way or the other. Others are a bit more conceptual, a bit more subjective, and we're taking a little bit more time to really nail those down. But the exercise has been very informative. We had some really good feedback during the committee sessions, and we welcome that feedback as we go along. For me, it's been a very important learning process about this aspect of implementing policy governance. And I think we're off to a good start, and I agree with the committees that it's a great opportunity to show the public just sort of the work and process behind the curtains right now. So we're not looking for the board to accept this monitoring report this year, but we think it might be a good thing for the board to look at it and think about how these things are taking shape as you move towards retreat season, and the question you'll ask yourselves about, do you want to do anything else with your ends policies? Thank you.
Any questions, comments on the ends policy we have in front of us, or? Larry?
Yeah, I think it's important that we should acknowledge the very hard work and hard thinking that went into this. And even though it is not complete in the sense that more thinking needs to be done about it, it is something that that shows the level of quality of staff that we have. It also challenges us as a board to look carefully at the interpretations and to apply our best reasonable person evaluation to that as we go on. So Mr. Carpenter and the staff have challenged us, and I think we should be prepared to dig into this at some level of detail over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else, either on the report or the monitoring in general? Mike?
When we adopted policy governance, I think the biggest question marks I still had in my mind was, how is this monitoring going to work? I really didn't have a good conception of that. And I really would like to compliment Matt and his staff in terms of the work they have done already on monitoring reports. I mean, it was just a lot of work to try to put together a logical schedule for presenting and reviewing these. That's a tough job right there. But they've of course gone way beyond that. And what we've seen already in terms of monitoring reports, this is probably the toughest one that Matt has had to address for us yet, and is As he said, it's still a work in progress, but I think it's very good work. But what we've seen here and what we've seen in some of the other monitoring reports is certainly first of all, helping me understand how this is going to be working. But I think it's really encouraging to see how it is working. And I'm very pleased at the work, and I know it's been a lot of work that Matt and his staff has put forth on this. It's really good.
Thank you. Anybody else? Prashant?
I'm just curious to get a little clarification from you, Eric, about when we do get an official report, what's the timeline, and would we necessarily use a retreat to inform whether we think this is in compliance?
Well, I think if you look at kind of the model, the template that he gave us here, he's got, for instance, fixed route, he's got in compliance, express ride, not in compliance, air ride in compliance, night ride, not in compliance. He's got various factors listed there in terms of why he thinks we're not in compliance with express ride or night ride. I think, the timeline we've laid out is he gives us this report in time for us to consider it for the retreat, at which time, hopefully we'll make an annual exercise of evaluating our ends. And it won't be the only time we talk about ends, obviously, is that, but it will give us a real time, because we're time limited in these monthly meetings, to discuss everything fully the way we want, but it'll give us more time to sit there and talk about, hey, this is a strategic goal that we need to focus on. And if some of these are not working, then do we need to adjust? Is it because, if half of the services that they're undertaking are not working or they're not in compliance, is that an ends policy issue that we need to adjust, or is that a staff, not putting their hearts into it that we need to adjust, right? So, or is that a resources allocation issue that we need to adjust to? But we're relying on this report and that data to inform our decision at the ends meeting, so that we can adjust our strategic vision and planning for the agency. So throughout this, I think Matt owes us the explanation of overall, how am I doing with the ends policies? How do I interpret these? What are the services that are going to meet these ends? What is it the board expects to see? And give it to us with enough time to digest that, think about it, and so we can all come with educated points to make and intelligent points to make in terms of, I think this needs to be adjusted in a certain way. So that's a very general way of saying what I just said, but that's kind of what I'm envisioning with it. We could follow up at a board retreat or any other meeting, frankly, and say, all right, I see costs, I see adjustments in costs, it's gone down, it's gone up. Why is that happening? And we should feel free at any particular meeting to say that. I mean, at the finance committee, we get data to support that either way, as you know. And we should raise those issues, and then Matt can think about that as he's developing this ends report and say, well, this is something that Prashant raised, and I think, other board members supported that, so I will include that in the report. So it's a continuous feedback loop, but it's just the retreat is just the kind of the big structured meeting where we can really put our pencils to the paper and say, I've been thinking about this issue ever since we talked about it in June, and I think this is the way we need to readjust this. What do you other board members think? And if, we go through the legislative policy-making process and come out with some sausage that looks and tastes good. So that's generally it, though. I mean, if everybody's got any thoughts about how the process can be improved or revised, I'm more than willing to hear it. Jack, I think you were first.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think one of the infelicities of the policy governance model is that we have this.
I am going to miss the way you use the word infelicities, by the way. You use that at least once every meeting, and I'm going to miss that. I just want to tell you that.
I guess I've got a narrow,
it's going to be a drinking game
narrow
every time.
quiver of words. But I think one of the challenges with it is that we have this structure that says in compliance and not in compliance, and I think it's worth unpacking that a little bit. I think as board members, we or you we have the responsibility to look at those as trajectories rather than as indicative of something very simple. So there are lots of times we won't be in compliance for all kinds of reasons, and we should look at why we're not in compliance and think about, are we trying to achieve the objective? Are we moving towards the objective? And I just think it's critical not to let the fact that not in compliance sounds so negative be something that it sounds like it's dispositive of how things have been going. The same is true for compliance. When we're in compliance, are we actually striving to meet our goal? And one of the things that came up at the last LAC meeting, a number of the participants said, I know we're in compliance, I know we're within the time window, but I've noticed that we're getting closer to the end of the window of time that performance is acceptable. And so we might still be in compliance, but maybe we're not headed in the right direction, or maybe we have an opportunity to reevaluate. And so I think it is incumbent upon us as board members and as staff members to acknowledge, yep, we're in compliance, but actually we've got data suggesting we might be heading in the wrong direction with respect to compliance, and vice versa for not being in compliance. Thank you.
Eli?
Want to start by echoing compliments to Matt and the staff and the team for beginning to articulate responses to these ends policies. Difficult work, and much good progress is being made. The question comes up as to process for us as board, and the last page of our packet, attachment 1, is the summary of the Finance Committee meeting. And we, at the Finance Committee meeting, had a presentation on these ends, and we had some deliberations as reflected in the minutes. So I think we as board members actually do have substantial opportunity to engage with and provide feedback to staff even before we get to this table. Again, I think the process, this policy governance, although we're 6 months in, wow, we haven't perfected it yet. I'm shocked. But I think that we're absolutely off on the right foot. We have a wonderfully talented and capable staff, and that our process actually allows multiple opportunities, and that doesn't prevent any of us from picking up the phone and giving staff a call. Not that we all need to call staff, because that's part of why we operate as a board, but I think it really is important to note that we're making great progress, and that we do have opportunities as individuals and members of committees and on the board to engage with staff over time, and I look forward to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt?
Thank you. I'm going to try to answer Prashant's question in a slightly different way. I think the answer is 1 to 2 months about how long the regular monitoring report every year would be submitted. The way it's set up, and you would see this in the bigger calendar when you have a moment to look at that, the end of the fiscal year ends at the end of September. We will work really hard in October to pull together the evidence of compliance or non-compliance with the ends and get it to the board in November or December, hopefully as early as possible, so that you have as much time with that as you can before you are asked to formally accept it in December. So 1 to 2 months, I think, is the annual process. But I also agree with other things that have been said, that it's not, that's not the only time the board has the opportunity to discuss the outcomes and achievements of the organization. Several of our ends are duplicated in the, for example, the quarterly service reports about ridership and customer satisfaction, sort of operational matters are coming to the board quarterly. The board has the right under policy governance to, I'm not going to say request, but actually demand, direct any frequency of monitoring of any policy that you like. I hope you don't do it every day, but if you ever felt like you needed it more frequently, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. There's also a policy that obligates me to alert the board to anticipated non-compliance. So, for example, if ridership were trending downward, I'm supposed to bring that to you as soon as possible, irregardless of the approved cycle of monitoring. So, so if something came to my attention that, this is probably heading towards non-compliance, it would be expectation that I would bring that to you as soon as possible. So it's certainly not a once a year occurrence. But when it is once a year, formally, 1 to 2 months with the material before you're asked to accept it.
Thank you. Any others? I mean, one issue I'm struggling with, I think, and kind of Prashant alluded to it, is the timing issue. Only because, if the staff is going to get us this report 1 to 2 months before the retreat, and we may need to think about adjusting timing of retreat and this report so that it lines up more closely with the fiscal year, in my opinion. Because we, right now, if we want the ends report will drive the ends discussion. The ends discussion will drive the budget process. The budget process will take place from, formulating from March to May. We will adopt it. We're asking them to think about the next fiscal year. For instance, this coming year, March to May, they're going to be deliberating about FY19, which doesn't start till, fall of 2018. So they're forecasting, a year and a half in the future, right? And we're asking them to do that way, way in advance. Is there a way we can align this report, the budget process, the implementation of the budget, and the implementation of whatever new ends we hand off to the board and make it more seamless and timely so we don't have these long stretches where, we've got to ask John and his staff to forecast, well, a year and a half from now, I think this is what we're going to have to interpret our ends policies to mean, where it could be vastly different. So I've right now, this is the best we got, but I think at some point I want to talk about timing and process for this to see how we can line these all up better. But I'll give that, I don't have a recommendation for that right now, but we'll think about it. Anything else? Prashant?
Yeah, and just sort of a follow-on that'll affect the timing is, we're this is the first ever type of ends report that we've seen before. And I want to really understand whether, or maybe think about and deliberate whether the interpretations are actually reasonable. Because, I don't know, it seems like there can be multiple reasonable interpretations. I want to make sure that we can actually come to an agreement that how Matt has interpreted it, we're fine with. I have an example in mind, but I don't want to go into detail right now. But so I just want to put that out there. And then, so maybe if that is somehow an iterative process that then sort of runs into the budget decision timeline, we should sort of think about that and maybe leave it for buffer or something like that. So.
Good point. Thank you. Anybody else on the ends policy monitoring? Okay. We'll move on then to item 3C, which is other board reports, ownership linkages, and we'll start out with a report from the LAC. Cheryl is just observing today. That's good. This is our new chair right here.
So let's see if we can make this work. Can you hear me okay?
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yep.
So, there we go. I want to introduce myself. My name is Kathleen Mozak-Betts. You've seen me around before. I am replacing, I hope well, Ms. Cheryl Weber, who is the outgoing chairperson. So I was just recently elected the chairperson of the LAC. I'd also like to take this time to introduce Mr. Larry Keeler, who has taken the co-chair, or was nominated and voted in as the co-chair of the LAC. And I would also like to thank the board for inducting Ms. Slowens and Ms. Burke as the new executive committee members. Thank you so much for doing that. I want to note that the LAC meeting minutes that you have before you are in fact a draft, that they are from our 12/12 meeting, and they will be reviewed, necessary changes made and voted upon at our January LAC meeting, which takes place Tuesday, January 9th from 10 a.m. to noon at the RIDE main office on Industrial. Which leads me to reiterating what Jack said earlier, that all of you are always invited and welcome to any of our committee meetings. We are certainly going to miss Jack and his input. He has been there both in person and our own private phone person. We lovingly call him Jack in the Box. I hope you don't mind me sharing that. But his input has been valuable, and we really, really will miss you. Thank you so much. So with that, there are just a few things that I'd like to bring to your attention. One of them is the public comments. And public comments are very important to us. We are noticing more ridership coming into the meetings, which is a very good thing, but it also indicates that there are some issues going on with our paratransit. Notably, again, what Jack said, the most important thing that we're hearing from our customers is, yes, we know that there is a 30-minute window, but whereas maybe some customers were used to getting picked up within the first part of the window, everything is ending they're coming like right at the end of that 30-minute window. And possibly we also understand that you can expect to be on the ride and sharing for up to an hour, so that makes your ride very, very long. And while it's within the window and an acceptable policy and practice, it's occurring more and more. And actually, we're heading out of the windows a little bit more is what we're hearing from our ridership. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I think some of it is, it was reported to us that 60% of the applications for paratransit are now new. So ridership has increased greatly. And so that's a very good thing. That means that our little secret of paratransit and being able to get around the city is getting out there, and that more and more persons who are seniors and have disabilities and need this service to be able to have valuable, good lives, to be able to go to work, to be able to go to the grocery store, to be able to go to the movies, to see our families, or whatever it is that we want to do. We have that same availability that those of you who have transportation and are not disabled have for yourselves. So that's a very good thing. It's just, I know that the paratransit study is starting up, and then hopefully that will help shed some light on ways that we can improve our services even more. The other issue, that just doesn't affect our buses or our lift vans, it also affects the sedan service. So I just would like you to be mindful of that when you're thinking about paratransit, that something else that Jack suggested several meetings ago, and it's really stuck with me, is that if a board member were to take this on, I don't know that any of you would, but I would like you to think about it, to take just 2 days of your business week, not your whole week, just 2 days of your business week, and only use the sedan or paratransit services to do all of your daily business, to be able to see what your ridership goes through on a daily basis. And while, yes, we are what Carolyn Growy said earlier, a premier service within the United States in terms of what we provide to our citizens, I think it would be eye-opening for you to have a better perspective of where the community is coming from and why we maybe want to expect a little bit more, even though you are already in compliance. So I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Kathleen,
Thank you.
and welcome. Thank you, Larry, and welcome. Next, we'll go to Watts and Mr. Krieg.
Very short. The meeting was canceled the day before.
I thought I remembered that as soon as I said it, but I thought I would punt it to you anyway. I teed it up for you. So then we'll defer to Mr. Guru Raja for the A2 Transportation Commission report.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the meeting was not canceled. We had the meeting yesterday, but I'll keep it brief because there were not any major decisions or resolutions that we passed. There were a couple important informational items. The City of Ann Arbor Public Works staff presented basic information about winter road maintenance priorities within the city, so how they manage clearing snow, information about the agency, the department, as well as some budgetary information that was nice to hear. The Transportation Program Manager of the city, Eli Cooper, presented how the city staff will be completing a planning project that combines and updates the city's non-motorized transportation plan with the transportation plan. So the goal is to have a single planning document that serves as a short, middle, and long-range document for how all modes of transportation are viewed, sized, and developed within the city. So the presentation was about the process of how the staff are planning that plan. The commission also reviewed a draft work plan, which will it's going to stay informal, but will probably be somewhat more set by next month. Important to note was that the transit millage informational item for the commission was set in October, and I requested that we move it up because initial conversations are discussing both August and November as a millage timeline. So I think it was appropriate to schedule that discussion a little earlier in the year and then move it later if need be. There was one somewhat unfortunate item on the agenda, which was the commission meeting schedule. Unfortunately, about a third of the meetings as planned originally conflict with this board meeting, including in January. This is due to holidays being on Monday and other commissions being bumped, other city commissions being bumped, and we're not part of that whole bumping process, so we have stayed on Thursday, but in about 4 of the situations from what I can count, it was bumped from the Wednesday, which it usually is the day before the meeting, to the day of the meeting. So we said that we would have that schedule at least for January, but basically we all yelled and said, no, this is not acceptable, and so staff is looking at ways to readjust that schedule, but there will be a conflict in January, so I imagine that I will be attending this meeting, not the commission meeting. So we'll go without a representative on that meeting for January. But hopefully it'll be resolved in January. January will be the only conflict. And that's about it.
Well, thank you. Sure, absolutely.
So just because this was the time that LIC was talking, I wanted to say a couple of things that I didn't say earlier. I would really encourage the board to find another liaison for the LAC. I think it is a very fruitful relationship, and I think any board member who got to do that service would really see a side of the work that the ride does that you just don't get to see sitting here. Just the expertise and compassion and unflagging commitment of staff members like Brian Klaus, who really just is stalwart, and we're really lucky to have him. I mean, there are lots of staff who are supported, but I just want to highlight Brian, and so I hope someone will take up that mantle. Also, with Carolyn, leaving. I guess there's an interim director, and I would encourage the staff to reach out to, I think his name is Alex Gossage, who's going to be the interim director of the CIL. And I think during that transition, it would be meaningful if we actually affirmatively reached out. One of my goals when I joined the board was that when I left the board, although I wasn't anticipating it would be this early, that this sense of consciousness about disability and accessibility and our A-Ride services would in here in the DNA of the board. And I've already started to see that happening. And I've heard from, other board members really reaching out on these issues. And I hope we'll continue to fan those flames so that there doesn't have to be a person with a disability in the room for us to be thinking about those issues, that it's just inherent to what we do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions about any of the committee reports that we just heard? Jillian?
I apologize if I'm repeating something since I was out of the room when the LAC started, but, and I did see that Eric has a letter, but I really just wanted to thank Cheryl Weber for her service on the LAC board and all the leadership that she has provided, and welcome our new folks who've stepped up back into leadership positions, I think, in some cases. And we really appreciate all the work that you do. And as I have mentioned to Cheryl before, I think that the LAC is in many ways an excellent standard of policy governance, and the way that they do things, and especially the things that they bring to us are really excellent in terms of looking at what the standard of service should be, where the standard of service should be improved, and whether the whether the performance is staying within that or moving in the right or wrong directions, and always pushing for things to be better, but being I think very pragmatic and very understanding and very well informed about what the service opportunities are. So I think the more that we can look to the LAC and their expertise, the better off we'll be, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done.
Thank you. Anybody else? We'll move on then to item 4, which is strategy and operational updates from the CEO. And 4A is a CEO report, which is in our packet. And Mr. Carpenter will take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Typically, I don't speak to the report. I simply look to the board to have a look through. Just a couple things I did want to highlight. First of all, we are very glad to have the return of Mr. Brian Klaus after an extended absence, so it is nice to have him back. US 23, Mr. Ajiba, Paul Ajiba, and I paid a visit to the Livingston County Board of Commissioners as a courtesy to let them know about a project that was coming on, and if you want an interesting story, talk to me after the meeting. Nothing to do with us, it was just stuff we saw while we were there. We're noticing some challenges with our operational facility, the Donga Bay Operations Center at 2700 South Industrial. On 2 occasions over the last couple of months, our boiler has failed entirely, and at one point it was so cold we actually almost had to send staff home. So there's definitely a little TLC in the building that's going to be needed. As the snow was melting the other day, we had to put the buckets out in the lobby because the roof was starting to leak. So definitely a reminder to us of the importance of proper preventative maintenance. And then one last thing, it's not in my report because it happened afterwards. On US 23, sorry, we were contacted today by a reporter for the Ann Arbor News, so I just wanted to let you know that we do anticipate some sort of article about that project in the next week or so. And then one other thing, as I think most of you are aware, an Amtrak train in Washington State derailed earlier this week in an unfortunate and tragic situation. Unfortunately, there was a loss of life. There is a policy that requires the CEO to not allow the staff to be unprepared for emergency situations. And so this is something that we have been doing behind the scenes quietly. Many of you may not be aware that staff have received active shooter training. Not something anyone wants to anticipate, but something that we have been doing. And you can't be in the industry as long as I have without having to grapple with one calamity or another. And every time I see something like what has occurred in Washington State, it reminds me that there's always room for us to do more in preparation for our staff. And I'm going to be working with Mr. Smith in operations on just that. But also this one reminded me of the importance of making sure that you, the board, are aware of what is best to occur in a catastrophic situation. particularly with respect to communication protocols among the board, between the board, with the media, with the public. And I'm going to be looking forward in the new year to perhaps revisiting that and updating some of our practices and bringing you into that conversation. So in a proactive way, so that long before anything occurs that we have to worry about, we've maybe even had a mock exercise or two so that we have a sense of what it would be like. Because we don't want to have one of those things occur and not be prepared for it. So a good reminder for us of the importance of preparation. So something else I just wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions on either the CEO report or any of the items in particular he just mentioned? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item then, which is 4B, a millage update. That's also in our packet. The millage referendum brief is there. The proposed ballot language is on the next page. I don't know if anybody had a chance to review that and take it into account. We also got some communication from staff on this issue earlier this week. About this, but this was discussed and deliberated at both committees. But I thought it would be a good chance for all board members to hear each other on this issue, raise it here, taking into account what you see in the packet here. And if there's any particular timing issues or, budgetary, the amount of the mill rate issues that we want to discuss. Maybe we want to bump it from 0.7 to 0.72 to fix the roof. I don't know. Yeah, but anything else that we might want to, timing issues, et cetera. Any questions about the sample ballot language that's in there? Happy to entertain those at this time. Any thoughts in general about millage at this time? Jillian?
Thanks. And I've made it my feelings fairly clear within the service committee that I feel fairly strongly that renew and restore in August is the right way to go. So I'll just skip that, but if anyone would like a lengthy discussion on the topic, I would be happy to oblige. My question is that it says 2018 or 19, and my question is, in the ballot language is what I'm looking at, and I'm wondering whether that, so our millage expires in 19, and my assumption is that when we pass the millage, we are starting from the day we pass the millage. So if we pass it in August, that, because we're on, I guess either way, no matter which way, we're on the following summer's taxes. Regardless, we can't say, oh, we already had that one, and then we're starting our 5 years after that. I was wondering if you could clarify that when it's just this 18 or 19 is what's
No
throwing
double
me off.
dipping, no.
Thank you. Not that we would do both, that we would
No, of course not.
delay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think as I look at the proposed ballot language here, which is really nothing more than a visual aid, to be clear at this point, I suspect this is a drafting comment reflecting the opportunity to go for a referendum vote this in the fall of 18. And if we were not successful for some reason, we have the opportunity to go in May of 19, just before the money would run out. So May of 19 is sort of our fallback position. So that it may be just, I'm sorry for the confusion of putting 2 years on there. There is one important point, though, that this brings up, a nuance of Act 55, which is our enabling legislation that we did discuss at one committee. I want to make sure everyone understands. Act 55 allows us to go once per calendar year for a referendum. So if we were to go in the beginning of a year and not be successful, we could not go until the next calendar year. So we are actually fortunate to have that working in our favor in this regard, that if we went in the fall of 18 and for some reason we're not successful, we can fall back to January 1 of 19 and be in compliance with the law. So that's just an angle that we're not sure everyone heard at the committees, and we wanted to make sure it was understood.
I appreciate that, and while I've got the mic and we're talking about the nuances of Act 55, I wanted to clarify something that we discussed at our meeting that I was not aware of before, which is that since each of our operating millages replaces the previous millage, if we were to want to, look at a service increase before our 5 years were over, it would be possible to put something on the ballot that would replace it earlier than that 5 years. So I think that's something that is worth keeping in. We're not tied to this level for 5 years if at some point in the next, say, 3 years, there were another opportunity. So I just appreciate clarification on all of these points. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Jack has his hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. This ungainly language in here, we grappled with it last time too. I had told myself, oh, I'm going to go try and fix that, but I did nothing to try to amend the law so that the public could actually understand what it is that was happening here. I mean, I think this is so cumbersome. It really works to our disadvantage and to the public's disadvantage to have this kind of packed paragraph when really what we're asking for is much simpler. But I think we're stuck with it for the time being, maybe in my newfound time. So I'm curious about two things. The first parenthetical, X, is that required? Do we know? Because I think that adds some complexity. I understand that it's also trying to explain something, but
You're referring to the X is the restoration and
Yep.
blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, if you look below there, there's the minimum legal requirements. So that first parenthetical is an attempt to satisfy it's an attempt, I mean, the mill rate to be authorized is a legal requirement. So it says
Right.
0.7 mils, but it's just an attempt to be more descriptive of that legal requirement.
okay. Anyway, as we're thinking about it going forward, I just wonder how lots of people will understand what that means. I'm sure there will be plenty of people who do, but I think you're in the voting booth and it's overwhelming. And I just wanted to double check something that Jillian said. I guess I didn't realize that when the millage took place, when the vote would happen, that it would immediately kick in. I thought we would set it up to kick in at the end of the current millage. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. And I think there are advantages if we can do that. And maybe I'm missing some of the disadvantages, but the advantages of not having to keep coming back, with more frequency. So I think it would be nice if we could have the first millage and then the second millage.
Sure. Thank you. Property taxes are collected twice a year, winter and summer broadly. Our tax expires in the summer of 19. The ballot would be worded in such a way as to immediately pick up in that tax collection period. So to be clear, if this vote were approved on August the 10th, I'm just picking, I don't know the exact date, but property taxes would not be collected on August the 11th. The ballot would be worded in such a way to say collection would start on your in mid 2019, and I lack the precision to say that properly, but there is no overlap or double dipping permissible in this situation. Just to be clear, we would set it up so that just as one is expiring, the next one kicks in. There is no overlap, but there's also no gap. And so our cash flow is not disrupted.
Right, so there'd be the first 5 years and then the second 5 years. The first 5 years would not be eclipsed.
Correct.
Thank you.
I mean, to your point about frequency, I mean, the most obvious political reason is, if you wait the full 5 years and go and lose, you're dead. So, I mean, we can't afford to wait.
Right, no, I got that point. I think I misunderstood what Jillian had said. I just wanted to make sure that we were going to get the best bang out of that first vote, and then get the full 5 years out of
Yeah.
the second vote.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Prashant?
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. Just to be 100% clear, though, you said the millage expires in 19, but really the vote was in 14 of May. So summer of 14 was the first year that taxes were collected, correct? So 14,
believe
15,
so.
16, 17, and 18. 18 is the fifth year that the original millage would collect revenue. And then this millage, whether it's August or November, wouldn't matter because it's after the summer collection anyway, would authorize collection starting the summer of 19. Okay. Okay. Just making sure.
That is correct. I mean, but it would, well, I mean, winter of 18 would be the first time, because it's summer, winter. So, I mean,
But our taxes are only collected in the summer,
but it's
right?
summer for us, right?
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to clear that up. I do have a couple comments. I think I also support the idea of renewing and restoring. I don't think there's any reason we really shouldn't be doing that. 5 years does not really, Headley doesn't seem to really take much of a cut over 5 years. And I was encouraged to hear that there might even be some nominal service added as a result of recovering that. That was encouraging, although I want the board sort of to monitor whether that maybe is the best decision over maintaining other ends and limitations like a reserve policy or things like that. But I'm very encouraged to see that there might be a plan for it. Hopefully it's done in a responsible way. Oh, and yeah, I mean, Jillian, you mentioned expansion of services. I do want to make sure we evaluate how our services have gone. Our current expansion service, which has not gone 5 years because we had to buy buses for the first couple of years. So I want to know, this is probably post-millage, but before we talk about expansion, that we have a really robust understanding of how our services in our current expansion have performed relative to metrics that we find reasonable. So, thanks.
Thank you. Eli?
So,
And by the way, don't get scared about the announcement. We do have extra time, so we're not going to run out.
well, I've only got a comment on one word, so it shouldn't affect how long the meeting goes. The first red font word, to maintain. And so if this is the proposed language, the question I have, not necessarily for answer, since we're not taking action today, is that the right descriptor? Because Prashant described that we might expand service. And so if we use language maintain in the item, as opposed to provide or support, enable, to fund, it might be subject to challenge by somebody who says you're doing more than what you had put in the millage vote language. So I'll stop there. I think you get the point. And as we bring this forward for action at some point, I would hope that the language enables staff the flexibility to execute the ends in a way as deemed appropriate at that time, and not artificially limit what prerogatives we have.
Thank you.
If I might, thank you for that point. We do appreciate that. And then I was reading something about a lawsuit targeted at a recent millage that very much on that point of, is the purpose clearly defined? But by way of clarifying process, we are looking forward to the board giving clear direction, sometimes sort of in the direction of the rate and the timing, probably through a vote of the board early next year, hopefully. After that, we have a little bit of time. We would engage our legal counsel to help sort of tighten this language up. So this really is a visual aid, I think, for this evening, and then bring back something specific for you. And I do believe the board needs to approve the ballot language specifically as well. So even after you've given us an approval on the date and rate that you would like us to pursue, we would still need to come back to you for a second vote on the specific ballot language. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Anything else on this item? Questions, comments? Jillian?
A comment. Since this is the first time that we have actually discussed this millage language in public, I just feel the need that someone should express the incredible amount of work that has happened over the last 5 years. You know, it did take us some time to get the buses in, but I was writing my little history of the library because we're doing a new website, and I was doing that today, and added in that in 2014, very shortly after this millage passed, we were able to put that number 46 route to Ypsilanti Township on the ground in August after passing the millage in May. So it really has been 4 full years that we have been implementing this plan. The last piece of the plan just went into place, this express route in Ypsilanti Township that's going to be happening in January. And so we really have kept this promise and have done an incredible amount of work and made an incredible difference. And the Sunday service in Ypsilanti went into effect in 2014 too, which I have heard over and over and over again has truly changed people's lives. It's opened up more job opportunities. You know, people can get to services, people can see family, people can get to visit loved ones in the hospital. So the amount that has happened because of this millage is really incredible. And I know that everyone in this room knows that, but I think that it's important to recognize how much meaning has this millage has had. And even though it's not as exciting to be increasing service and putting all these new lines on the map, the service that we have and the fact that it's working and it's doing a great job is so important to maintain. So I really appreciate all staff's work on that, and I'm enthusiastic about the next step.
Thank you. Any other comments on ballot language or millage in general? Okay. I think the goal is by next month we would hopefully circulate one more issue brief on this, and then we would probably ask for some kind of decision on timing and mill rate by next month, and fully adopt that so we can get into campaign mode, which you can also read as fundraising mode. So that's to come. Any other questions on it? Thank you. We'll move on to item 5 then, governance board development. 5A is governance policy monitoring, and this month it's 3.3, the board members' code of conduct. This is one, we're going to go through and monitor these through the policy manual. Since this is kind of the first go around with all of these, you know, I don't think it's helpful to send out a survey saying, are we in compliance? And everybody says, well, of course we're not in compliance. We haven't even done this yet. But I just wanted to kind of highlight the board code of conduct policy and talk through some of the, I won't read it verbatim. We don't have to discuss it verbatim. But I just highlighted a few things that I thought would be worth mentioning here. You know, the primary statement at the top is the board commits itself and members to ethical, business-like, lawful conduct, etc. Don't do anything stupid, crazy, illegal, or embarrassing. Members must demonstrate loyalty to the ownership of the AATA, unconflicted by loyalties to the CEO or staff, other organizations, or any personal interest as consumers. And you know, this is, we're losing, you know, our legal voice on the board here, but so, I mean, we don't have anybody to define a lot of these things for us in the legal context, because I'm not going to do it. But if anybody has any questions, we do have, we do have Kyra too, that's right. We got, oh no, that's right. You've been replaced, you're right. We got Kyra now. We have Kyra now. We can do it, that's right. That is. Right. Yeah, we are going to pick a board member who's going to say infelicity. One board member is going to say infelicity at every meeting. And then we're going to drink to it. 3321, you know, and this is kind of the conflict of interest section, which is 332. And that highlights that each January, we're going to be requiring all board members to disclose whether or not they feel have any potential conflicts. We'll probably circulate that before the next board meeting and just ask people, probably parroting this language here in terms of self-dealing, disclose in writing to us any involvements or potential conflicts that you feel you may have, or any reason whatsoever you feel you couldn't discharge your duties as a board member. And if so, what potential conflicts might there be, and describe for us those situations where you might feel conflicted about discharging these duties with any other duties you may have in your personal or professional life. Okay. Moving on then to item 333, which is individual authority. 3331, I think this is the basically the board speaking with one voice provision. Members' interaction with the CEO or staff must recognize the lack of authority vested in individual members except when explicitly authorized by the board. While individual members should share their perspectives and advice with the CEO, they shall not give or imply direction to the CEO or any staff. That's to maintain board holism. I think, one of the struggles I've seen throughout the first 6 months of policy governance is the implication or suggestion, and people thinking, well, I mentioned this at a meeting, how come it wasn't followed up on? I think this is probably just a process gap that we need to close, and that if you want the staff to act on something, you do need to bring the rest of the board into the fold to get their at least head nod or some kind of record that we all want to go forward with that direction, via, for instance, this train station letter. We can't just say, yeah, chase down that data for us, Matt, and see if from a technical standpoint we can comply. I wanted to open it up to everybody to see what kind of direction do you want to give? What do you want Matt to do? Matt, is this something you want to, do, and is this something you can do? So we need to, I still see gaps where we say, hey, I've mentioned something about the budget, or I've mentioned something about a project. I wanted this data done. It wasn't followed up on. Matt does have the power to politely decline those things, although he should be taking our advice and considering it at all times. But in terms of actual direction, we only speak through a resolution or a vote of some kind. And when we go on the record with that direction, that's when Matt is compelled to move, or the staff is compelled to move. So it never hurts to kind of keep reiterating and reinforcing these things, but that's just, we need to check and balance each other, so that's why that is there, board holism. One other thing I wanted to mention was 3333. Except for participation in board deliberation about whether reasonable interpretation of voices, blah, 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 CEO, members will not express individual judgments on performance of the CEO or other staff. That's one that I've struggled with, because I don't know that we need to limit ourselves to that. I mean, in the one sense, we are required to do that when it comes to CEO evaluation, right? I mean, which is expressing individual judgment about how the CEO and the staff are doing. On the other hand, I think it's a matter of context and function, that if we are going to express an individual judgment about the performance of the staff or CEO, that we take it into context and not say this is terrible, but we express an individual judgment about criticisms limited to a particular project, a particular service, a particular whatever that we're doing, and save the kind of annual performance review for that. And if we see a gap, that we don't automatically make a judgment that says, staff is failing, CEO is failing, everything is terrible, but we at least give them a chance to correct that action and come back to us with a plan for it. As Jack pointed out, we're going to be not in compliance a lot of the time. It's not a disaster if we say, well, why isn't this done? Well, because we haven't done it yet. Well, I mean, that's going to be the way it is. So I'm not sure. I don't want people to read that language and think, well, I can't criticize the CEO anymore. I can't criticize the staff anymore. But I do think, I read it anyway to mean, and this is kind of a board exercise, I do read it to mean it's all about the context and the way we do it and methodology. But I'm happy to hear opinions about that. Just some other ones that I highlighted were 334, don't intimidate or harass board members, staff, or members of the public. And 339, which is what we talked about before, several times members remain accountable to the AATA board for their actions and statements regarding transit-related issues. We've talked about that for a couple of months now. I think Eli brought up a suggestion at maybe the last meeting about potential language, which was, and I had forgotten that, I was rereading my notes coming into this meeting, but language that board members' views should be consistent with adopted policies, plans, and programs might be a good add to this section here. So maybe we can consider that as we go forward with our, as revising, and we might bring that up for adoption at a future meeting. But I kind of like that add. Any questions about code of conduct or any review on that? Larry?
Yeah, I would like to let the board know that this is actually a very useful time to review this. Let's see, what was the date? On December 14th, I was called to a meeting at which I was reprimanded for violation of the code of conduct by two members of the executive committee, or the governance committee. And my feeling is that I did not violate the code of conduct, and I'm sorry that's a little bit late, but I am prepared with handouts. My supposed violation was that I had, first of all, that I had suggested some ways of overcoming what I saw as a difficulty for a couple of groups to use the express service. And I prefaced it with saying that I would not dream of trespassing on the AAATA's staff's expertise, but familiarity with the area suggests a few possibilities. And for sharing my ideas on that, I was told that this was a violation. I do not believe that it is, because there are three policies in particular in the Code of Conduct that authorize this. The first being 3331, which states that members' interaction with the CEO or the staff must recognize the lack of authority vested in individual members, while individual members should share their perspectives and advice with the CEO. They shall not give or imply direction to the CEO or any staff. And I am at a loss to know how I could be more clear that I was not attempting to direct anybody.
I'll tell you how you were in violation. I mean, your communication, Larry, which you're leaving the key piece out for people who don't know, is your communication went to Brenda Stumbo, an elected official of Ypsilanti Township, with a CC to Matt. It wasn't to the CEO, it was to Brenda.
Yes.
Conversations you had with her, which you didn't alert Matt to before you did it, which you didn't allow any staff to weigh in on before you had that communication. Then you CC'd him on it, saying, here's
All right,
how
Mr.
we can do
Chair.
it.
Mr. Chair, I have the floor.
Well, I'm responding to you. Said I'd
Yeah,
like
but
to know.
I'm not done,
and I'm
because
telling
I'm
you how
about
you'd
to
like to-
address the very issues that
Okay.
you are, yeah. Policy 3211, members shall maintain effective ambassadorship and coordinated advocacy with member municipalities. This was at the end of a long process that began in August, at which time I had enunciated the new services to the Board of Trustees of the township and the public there. The response that I had gotten was to express frustration and to express a lack of confidence that the process by which the services were provided had adequately addressed the needs of the community. So of course I talked about that with the CEO, and we had discussions together and over the next few months with the township, and it was as a part of this ongoing discussion that I wanted to address these issues. I also want to reiterate the policy that you mentioned, Eric, which is members must demonstrate loyalty to the ownership of the AAA TA unconflicted by loyalties to the CEO or staff. And what I found, I think, is a very interesting and informative experience. In other words, I think this is something that the entire board can take as a specific example of how we apply the policy governance to what we are doing. And in order to help that process, I have prepared a more in-depth summary than I could go into given the time here that I can give to board members, and also a set of questions that I think would be helpful for us to think about as we go into the retreat. So I don't want what I'm saying to be taken as a criticism or in any way negative, but I think it can be used as a learning experience, and that we can all progress in our knowledge and understanding of how the policy governance system can actually be applied in, shall we say, where the rubber meets the road.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to weigh in on this? Open dialogue with elected officials is certainly a good thing. Linking with owners is a good thing. Open dialogue, back and forth, solving issues is all good. I think in this case, we would have been better served had you said to Matt, I plan to communicate with Brenda in this way, or maybe we can do this together, rather than not giving him a heads up, seeing him on the email. It leads the impression, in my opinion, that you're speaking for the board and that you are binding the board. And you don't get absolved by saying, I would never dream on stepping on the staff's expertise, but here's some things you can do. When you communicate with a elected official about that on planning issues without talking to the staff first, I think it undermines their credibility and the board's credibility, quite frankly. And without clearing it with, not clearing it with, but without at least discussing it with the board first, or the staff, if it's a planning issue, it leaves the impression that you're speaking for us when in fact you haven't, because you haven't given that authorization. So I mean, if you want to bring it back to the policy, the highlighted words are, we should highlight are, except when explicitly authorized by the board. Now, if you had said to us, I mean, I think what you're about to hand out and the discussion you want to have, had you done that first, I mean, I think the learning point is if you had done that and we had said, yes, Larry, please lead this effort for us, yeah, I think go ahead and we would have no problem with it. I mean, I think what you're probably about to suggest, we probably can endorse and do it. I think it's just a matter of what's the step in the process and giving us the heads up before you're going to do it. I don't think anybody I think you're probably the appropriate one from Ypsilanti Township to lead that effort in terms of looking at that issue. But it would have been more appropriate had you discussed it with board and staff first. I think that's the main point that I would look at in terms of this whole process. But I think,
And I would continue to differ on that, but as I say, I think this is something that we can talk about in more detail, since especially the first topic of the retreat is ownership relations.
sure.
So, yeah.
Jillian?
Thanks. So I was unaware of any of this situation, but I was a little surprised. I don't know if this policy was on our annual schedule to be discussed, but I don't see
Which policy is that?
the 3.3 Board Members Code of Conduct. I don't know that that was on the schedule for us to be discussing this month. And so I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate to bring up a policy, read through it, and opine on it as as a matter of course, that the interpretation of that policy is up to the board. And just as much as actions that a board member takes, that a board member would have no place directing the staff to do something without the approval of the full board. I don't think that a board member would have a place directing another board member to do something without the full board. If we are actually going to hold each other accountable, that seems like it should be something that's a full board decision and not just a governance committee decision. We didn't decide when we adopted policy governance, we didn't hand over anything to committees. We said that the board is acting as one board, all 10 of us together. I think it's worth having a conversation about, because if it's not black and white, and I don't think that this is necessarily a black and white situation in terms of, oh, this is clearly a violation of X, and if it is subject to some interpretation, the board is who does that interpretation. So I would like to know what the procedure is for dealing with questions about the code of conduct in the future, because it doesn't appear that this was necessarily the ideal way to approach it.
Thank you. I think there's been something being circulated. So to address Jillian's points, I guess in terms of process and review of Section 3, which is the governance process, the governance policies, yeah, we still probably have a little ways to go in terms of what we review and when. This has been on the board. I mean, this was on the board agenda because we're going through 3.1, then 3.2, then 3.3, then 3.4. I mean, eventually if you recall, we were going to start with 3.0, but it didn't make sense because we couldn't really decide if we were in compliance or not until we interpreted or at least reviewed all the policies that made up 3.0. So we're going to save that for last. But 3.3 seemed appropriate this month because we had gone through 3.1 and 3.2. So it's been on the board agenda, and people have had notice about that, and they've had a chance, hopefully, to review 3.3. If people have, I'm bringing it up not to opine and say this is the way we ought to do things, but I'm bringing it up so these are the things we can discuss and debate. This is the whole point of this. The issue I hadn't planned to bring up what Larry brought up, but he introduced it, so I thought I would opine on it. We don't all have the same information about what happened and when, so it's some of us know about it and some of us don't. So yeah, I apologize to the rest of you who are kind of new to this and flying blind. So this is a conversation Larry wanted to bring up, is probably hey, let's look at this and see, let's talk about the process opportunity. Yes, it's for the whole board to decide how we interpret the policy, and this is a good context in which we can decide, hey, this is a violation or it's not a violation. It was brought to our attention that this situation occurred. The governance committee thought this was a violation of speaking with one voice as a board, and so we did talk to Larry about it. Two of the governance committee members did, because we felt it was. We didn't feel it was necessary to wait for a board meeting to do that, because we all three felt that was a violation. But Larry wanted to raise it. He has every right to raise it, and he has, the floor to raise it. We can all debate it here. If the process is going to be, we can't check and balance each other until a board meeting, until we all have the opportunity to discuss it, I'm not sure that's the most effective way to address each board or potential board code of conduct potential violation either. But, to the extent we know about them and we should address them, we can address them right away. I'm not sure each one deserves a full hearing about that, but, I'm certainly open to discussion about it. If somebody's got a more perfect way to decide, here's how we decide if somebody's within violation of the code of conduct, or here's how we're going to lay out a more appropriate, reasonable interpretation of each one of these sections, that's why I'm bringing it up tonight, so we can do that. Larry's brought up a context in which we can do that, so if anybody's got a thought about process or methodology about how we can do that, or the process to check and balance whether or not we're out of compliance, if there's an issue about it, I'm open for it. In this particular situation, now that's kind of a broader statement. In this particular situation, we thought Larry was stepping around the speaking with one board voice, so we talked to him about it. But if others feel differently, and clearly you do, then let's have that discussion. Let's get it out there. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say that clearly I do. I obviously don't have the details of the situation in front of me, and so, perhaps you were fully
Fair
correct
enough.
in that. The point that I was making is that I don't think that the governance committee has the authority to speak with one board voice either. If we are speaking with one board voice, and it explicitly says that a group that is formed by board action is, also has to.
Well,
has
nor
to
did we
adhere to
purport
the
to, though.
principles.
We didn't purport to speak with one board voice. We thought he was in violation, so we talked to him about it, but we didn't say the whole board thinks you're out of order. I mean, we certainly didn't say that. That was a governance committee meeting, so maybe we were out of our authority to do that, but that was something we thought we would at least talk to Larry about. I mean, there's nothing punitive about it. I mean, it was a discussion.
Thanks. I think it would be, I think that to your point about not being able to wait for a board meeting in order to be able to talk, we need to have the authority to, or not the authority, we need to be able to say things and do things. And I believe that in being we are each doing it as ourselves. There's a difference between doing something as yourself and doing something as the board. So I do think that it's worthwhile discussion for the retreat, and perhaps we can review some of Larry's documents and hold off on this discussion till then. But I think that it would be worth considering the real logistics of being able to make our own decisions using the best knowledge and the best abilities that we have. There's a reason we've been appointed to these positions, and then and thinking about how that interacts with the full board policy.
Thank you. Any others? Sue?
So I think this is really a very beneficial topic. I think it's something that the board has danced around on for probably a number of years. And we have seen from time to time various examples where this topic has created some strain. So I see this as an opportunity. And it's an opportunity because it is a way for our board to grow and to use our retreat to help better identify examples, and then based on those examples of where individuals are functioning as individuals individually versus representing the board on another board or committee. There are these different nuances, and I think they're all, to some degree, important to talk about individually and not talk about the idea of how we represent the board kind of in one big bucket, because I think there are a lot of different variations. So I really appreciate the topic being brought up. I appreciate the constructive and civil nature of the discussion. I think it's something like the Ann Arbor train station, another good example of how board members are speaking. And I really look forward to a deeper dive that can help us move forward constructively at the retreat. So thanks for bringing it up.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Jack is dying over there. He wants to say something. Anybody else? All right. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 5B, which is Board of Education, the retreat. The last page of the packet has a potential agenda of the retreat. And it's fairly basic. Morning from 9 to 12 is ownership and ownership linkage. After a break for lunch and introductions, of course, we have the afternoon, which is from 1 to 3, updating and talking about END's policies. This is also where we would do a lot of the kind of strategic leadership, visioning, planning, et cetera, on a high level. Not worrying so much about wordsmithing and tweaking here and there, but new strategic concepts that we want to introduce, long-range planning things, innovations that we want to see the ride take on, et cetera. This would be the place to do that, so we can start at least getting some cohesion around the concepts that we want the organization to focus on, so we can start hammering those into actual goals and strategic vision planning for the staff. After that, we would have some board development items such as board education, board recruitment, some other various things that will populate there. And then we'll kind of wrap up at the end. I don't know if I mentioned it at the last meeting, but Rose Mercier, I think it's not Mercier, Mercier, because she's French-Canadian, is going to be our, who's got a lot of policy governance experience and facilitation experience, mostly in Canada, but some in the U.S. as well, has agreed to be our facilitator for that meeting. She's coming up with several ways to populate in more depth some of these items, but I wanted to get this in front of you well in advance of the board meeting so you could review it. Weigh in and give us any feedback, thoughts you may have of anything glaring that's missing, or things that you kind of sub-bullets you think might be helpful to add to these, any of these policies in particular. And if there's something you'd rather see in place of something else, please let us know that now. So I don't know if anybody has any comments, questions about it at this point, but we wanted to keep it, we thought broad topics and fewer of them would be more productive than having a lot of little topics that we have to keep moving on, because then it just kind of turns into a regular board meeting, which is not the point of this. But if anybody has any questions, thoughts, concerns about the agenda now or in the coming weeks, please let us know. Larry?
I guess not so much a concern, but something to be thinking about as we go forward with the strategic thinking and the strategic nature of our role. And that is, there are a number of people in this area who have very good skills and experience in thinking about transportation very broadly and futuristically. And I'm thinking particularly of some of the people at the University of Michigan in the transportation engineering and UMTRI. These are people who have a great deal that they could help us understand as we try to think about ideal policies that will lead our organization into the future. So maybe next time.
Well, I mean, we can, if you have some concrete thoughts about how they can weigh in and inform some of these discussions, I'd be open to suggestions about that. I mean, if we can feed those to Rose so she can either any particular papers or concepts or anything else that would be helpful to inform our discussion, or if there's stuff you want to bring that would help inform this, please do. There's also probably, I mean, maybe there's opportunities for those people in terms of ongoing board education to come to board meetings, and we could have education spots for them in terms of presenting to us. I mean, that would be also very helpful. So let's not lose the momentum on that or the idea. Jillian?
Thanks. It was my understanding, based on, I guess, previous discussions and some recent conversations at the Service Committee, that we were going to be kicking off some more strategic planning type things with this retreat. And I'm seeing a lot of policy governance conversation in here and not a lot of strategic planning. I know that updating ends policies could certainly play into what our goals are, what our high-level goals are, what the trade-offs are that we're interested in making, and where we would like to go. But again, to Eli's earlier point, I don't think that a member of the public would necessarily know that if that's the kind of thing we're going to discuss. If that is what we're doing, I'd like for staff potentially to be prepared. I'm wondering what the tools are that we can use to be having some of the conversations about our values that would kick off the next episode of sort of service planning and thinking about the future. I know that's something that we've discussed a number of times, and I thought that we were going to start it at this retreat, and I'm just not seeing it in this agenda. So maybe it just needs further explanation.
So, yeah, we couched it in terms of policy governance. It's the ends policies, but it is the strategic. It's all of what you said and what I said. I mean, I think what we've told Rose is the purview of the board is to. I mean, the whole purpose to going to policy governance was to have higher level strategic leadership planning, visioning discussions. So I guess I would probably, if you see a conflict here or not seeing what you want in this agenda, then I guess in terms of strategic planning, maybe you can further elaborate on what it is that you want to see. I mean, I think you started to describe a description of values that would kick off strategic planning, but if that's in conflict with updating ends policies, and maybe this is too colloquial, and it's just, updating ends policies make it sound like we're just going to tweak some words here and there and just tinker with what we have, which is not what this is supposed to be. What it's supposed to be is, are these still the values? Are these still the goals? Are these still the strategies that we want to pursue? Or let's say somebody says, hey, I want to see us with an all-electric, I'm just making this up, but if I want to see us with an all-electric fleet in 5 years, how do we incorporate that as an end, and how would we kick that off to the staff, and what do we need to know to do that? And if we all as a board say, yeah, I'd like to see us as an all-electric fleet within 5 years too, and that's something we want to adopt, that's got to get translated into a policy that we hand off to the staff. That's the purpose of this. So whether it's, mixing in other multi-modes of transportation or going to another service area or something like that, updating ends policies is supposed to be reflective of that whole broader discussion and not just tinkering with what's on the page there. So maybe we will reword this so it's more properly reflective of what I'm trying to say, instead of just updating its policies, but it is supposed to encompass that whole broader discussion. And maybe 2 hours isn't enough for that. Maybe we should chop an hour off ownership linkage and put an hour more on strategic vision and planning, updating its policies, but that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at, if you want specifics, some of the things that we teed up at our last retreat, which are some of these big picture questions that inform how we do service development. So ridership versus coverage is one of them. How much value do we put on ensuring that that the high need riders have service? How much value do we put on making sure that the person who pays the taxes has the, if you pay taxes in this area, is the bus going to be coming to this area, or is it going to be going over here to someone who really needs it, but maybe not as many taxes are coming to that area? Like it's a legit question that we need to address, is how that parity plays out. We need to talk about some of the, like how much how many connections we're okay with people making? Do we want a system that has more transfers, or, you know, a system that is, you know, more, sorry, I'm looking at, it's getting late. You can't keep me past 9 p.m. So, you know, there were a lot of big questions, and I'm not articulating them particularly well right now. There were a lot of big questions that came out in our last retreat about where we're spending our resources, and what kind of system we're trying to make, and what values that system has. And so I think that we have some of that addressed in our ends policies, but, you know, we have some big questions. You know, what does it mean to add another municipality? What do our external relationships look like? You know, those kinds of values that we started to bring up, and yeah, this is way too much for a retreat, I get that. But I had hoped that we would be able to lay out some of the values that would lead into service planning. So I guess I would love some more specificity about what kinds of ends policies we might be able to discuss, because I think if we take all of our ends policies, it's gonna be pretty hard to take it down into kind of actionable or directionable places.
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head, which is we've got to do something actionable and directionable. I mean, I want people to come out of this retreat feeling that their time was their valuable, very valuable time for all of us was productive, and that we came out of it with we moved the needle on something in some way, whether it's we more clearly articulated our values, or we came up with a new direction for some strategy and some new way. Again, electrification is one, or autonomous buses or another, something like that. If we move the needle, we certainly can't address all those big questions that we started with last retreat here, but if we can move the needle on some of them, and we're cognizant of we have very little time. I mean, I think we dedicated a lot of time to ownership and ownership linkage, because we have still a lot of questions about that. We've never really fully defined it, resolved it, and moved on from it. And so I think, you know, as we're hearing tonight with the issue Larry brought up, we're still struggling with it a lot. So this is something we need to, and Larry's got some prepared retreat questions, which are going to be great. But this is, you know, because we have to make some trade-offs and we can't fit it all in, updating ends policies is something that we can control versus, you know, the values discussion and what are we driving, and all the questions you just posed are good. You know, in terms of the trade-off, how do we structure it, or which two do we tackle that we can actually move the needle on in 2 to 3 hours? That's a serious whittling down of things. And you know, if you've got some topics that you'd like us to focus on, please send them to me, and if we can circulate that and give Rose some direction about it, then it'll be just that much more of a productive retreat. So if you can articulate that and circulate that among the board, I would love for you to do that. I think Sue had her hand up first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I just really echo and agree with Jillian, and I don't see anything that says strategic planning on the agenda, and it is what I thought we were going to talk about. So maybe it's nomenclature getting in our way, but I'm also mindful of how the community is going to read and understand an agenda. And I wonder if we might be able to use language that is more direct with strategic planning, if that's in fact what we think we're doing, which is what I think in our service committee we did say we were doing. And perhaps then toward the end of the agenda, there's a linkage. How does it link to policy governance so that it unencumbers an earlier portion of the agenda to be a little bit more pure and full and robust with strategic planning, and not bound by the integration of how it fits in ends, which might limit some of the creative and innovative discussion. So I think we're losing ourselves in some language, and if we could maybe try to think about what we mean and perhaps redefine some of these topics on the agenda, we could ensure that we're really all on the same page.
Thanks for those. Just a couple of comments on that. When we go down the road and using the term strategic planning, I don't want us to get confused. I don't want that to get confused with strategic operational planning, which is the staff's role. It's not the board's role to do that. But we do have a role in saying, hey, this is a strategy that we want to pursue, or this is an operation that we want to see. This is a new technology we want to pursue and have the staff look at it. This is a new whatever that we want to see. That's, before everybody gets, I see you're huffing already, but before everybody goes off and does that, well, we have to do this, or we have to get involved in the weeds. I don't want anybody to get confused. Strategic operational planning is something the staff is going to execute. We have the job to give them that strategic vision and planning values, I guess to use Jillian's term, that they can use to then do that operational planning. So we're talking about terms and nomenclature, and I don't want it to get confused. The other thing is, don't lose sight of the fact that we have to come out of this with some ends policies that we can then give to the staff so they can start their budget process and form a budget around those ends. So, if we're fine leaving the ends totally the way they are and saying, yeah, we're not going to tweak these, and we just want to talk about, other bigger concepts than just the ends, and we're fine leaving those alone. But I want to not lose sight of the fact that we do have to finalize some ends policies at some point so we can give them to the staff so they can do a budget for that. And that was probably, this was, to put the ends policies on here and updating that was an attempt to make sure we don't lose sight of that, because there is some practical work there. Larry.
To put it very succinctly, what I think we need is education in what the possibilities are for the long-term future. We have a very heavy responsibility to create ends that are both visionary and realistic. Most of us do not have experience or have not followed what the possibilities are. I would like to be educated by somebody who really, or somebodies who really know directions that things are going in and possibilities for the long-term future before trying to articulate ends that may come out to be either too broad or too vague or too specific. So that's what I have hoped that we would get at some point, and I hope we'll keep that in mind for future education.
Thank you. Eli?
So we migrated to policy governance, and in that process, we deliberated what were the advantages of policy governance relative to where we were prior to that move. And I recall being informed about how the board would be freed from the confusion of day-to-day oversight, and the staff would benefit from hearing the board speak through a common voice. But what I'm feeling and what my reaction to was this discussion about strategic operational planning as opposed to strategic planning. And let me throw some thoughts out there. I have no interest whatsoever in doing market or route segmentation analysis at a board level. That was not anything that we did in the prior governance model, nor is it one that I think we're equipped to do, and that we rely on and delegate those responsibilities to staff. But the concepts on the constructs of freeing us up from the meanderings over should we or should we not approve a contract for $180,000 to enable us to invest that time in strategic thinking, strategic planning, and visioning. And so when I look at an agenda and I have the first 50% of time on ownership and ownership linkages, I don't know how that freed me up for what this board has been clamoring for, even during the formative evolution of policy governance, was to unshackle us from the minutia and allow us to elevate. So I hope that, and Eric, I think you're onto it by saying, hey, we can maneuver this agenda so we reduce some of this ownership in the morning. We could add more time to strategic thinking, and I mean strategic planning and thinking, not operational assessments, because that's best left to the professionals. But let's get at it and let's get past the, and I hate to use this language, but I'm going to, the policy governance mumbo jumbo, and let's get to some strategic planning and thinking and behaving board-like. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I think you're clamoring for it, and we're all clamoring for it. The issue with the owners and the ownership linkage is, a big part of the strategic planning that we need to think about is who are our owners and what do they want, and how are we going to find out what they want? And otherwise, we're 10 people in a room who, yeah, we're duly appointed to represent that. But if we don't know what our owners want and who they are and how we link with them and communicate that, and we don't have a good sense of that. So that's why we've dedicated some time to it. Hold on, let me finish. You can, we just don't, in my opinion, and we've struggled with it, and we've noted that in the governance committee, and we still struggle with it. So that's why we wanted to dedicate some time to it, and I think that's appropriate. But yeah, we are clamoring for it. But we hear you, and we'll adjust this agenda to, hopefully give us enough time to talk about a lot of these issues. But I want something productive to come out of it in terms of, all right, we've got some action items and some action steps, and this is what we're going to do to move the needle. So hopefully we can do that. Follow up.
So I respectfully disagree on the amount of integration that this board has with our owners as expressed as ownership linkages. I was quite pleased and impressed at the response to the survey conducted by an independent survey professional about the perspective and perception of this organization by our owners. Okay, if we were a group of 10 individuals, I don't know that we would have had a 90% rating from those who were surveyed about how well this authority is perceived by the public. Those were not just riders, those were owners. Those were some riders. And I think that it's a mischaracterization to describe this board as being out of touch with the owners. I think, on the contrary, the data, whether it's our own onboard ridership surveys or now polling and survey work done by a polling professional, indicates that the owners value and appreciate and recognize the guidance that the staff provides in terms of service and that we provide in linkage to them through our board deliberations. So maybe I'm missing the policy governance linkage to ownership feelings, but when I look at the assessments that have been conducted and the way that our organization is valued, I'm not sure that we need to spend a lot of time in ownership linkages and more in continuing to express our own views as it relates to how we interpret our value as an appointee to the board, our communication that we all have, because none of us talks with 200,000 owners. We all work within our cadre of circles of communication, and I think it's, again, to be redundant, I think it's working fairly well, but what I hear is a champion at the bit, a desire to allow the board to migrate towards strategic thinking that was part of what we were persuaded was a value of policy governance. I think we're on the right path, and I appreciate the opportunity to even debate or discuss this at this late hour, because I think it's important that we have the chance to share our ideas back and forth. Thank you for that.
Anybody else? Okay. Item 6 then, any emergent business? Okay. Item 7 then, closing items. Any topics for the next meeting anybody wants to highlight other than things like the millage or the obvious ones that came up? retreat, obviously, which will take place we will have one more meeting before the retreat as well. Public comment, I think our public's left us at this hour. We can, I don't, anybody want to weigh in on board assessment or anything else? Sue?
I appreciated that Jillian, I'm sorry she had to leave, but that she brought up the 5-year plan and kind of looking back and reflecting. I actually was reflecting not only on what we've accomplished as a board, but what our staff accomplishes, and would really like to kind of close out the year with extending appreciation from the board to all the staff, and especially to our drivers, who I think are the unsung heroes, shoveling for our riders to be able to get access to buses, and to those who are maintaining all of our equipment every day. There is a tremendous workforce behind us that really are the backbone of the organization, and so I do think it's important to utilize this time for that reflection. And then finally, I appreciate, Matt, that you brought up thinking about emergencies and emergency planning. I think that is absolutely a critical component, and really appreciate that you're bringing it up. And I look forward to the board participating in some simulations so that we collectively share in some training to be able to support staff in the most constructive way. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Larry?
Yeah, in the chair's written report, there was a beautiful photograph of a Christmas tree surrounded by an incredible number of gifts. And this is from the staff to people in need. I think that we as a board should acknowledge and congratulate the generosity, warm-heartedness, and community spirit of our staff.
Duly noted. Thank you. Congratulations to the staff. I think, is that an annual thing you guys do, I think? Or very much. Congratulations and well done. Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else? Matt?
More a comment than an assessment point. There have been a lot of compliments directed towards staff this evening. I wanted to say thank you on behalf of the organization. It's a great team, getting better every day. I'd like to express my personal gratitude to Jack on his last day with us. It's been a real pleasure. Let's keep having lunch at the fine establishment of the Red Hawk. Great food, great prices, I should add. One last thing, maybe to end on a high note. Jack once famously opined that he saw part of his job was to look at me every meeting and decide whether or not I should be fired. As we have exhausted the agenda and no motion has come forward, I think I've somehow dodged the noose. Thank you.
You outlasted me.
7D then, can I have a motion to adjourn? It's Jack, seconded by Roger. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed?
Yeah, thanks.
We're adjourned. Thank you.